Three legendary detectives, Nancy Drew's sharp intuition, Philip Marlowe's gritty resolve, and Miss Marple's quiet brilliance, collide in a pulse-pounding Los Angeles mystery. Summoned by the cryptic AV, they uncover the Eclipse Codex, a deadly ledger exposing a secret cabal's crimes. Hunted by the ruthless shade, they navigate blood-soaked clubs, hidden vaults, and shadowy hills, unraveling betrayals and murders. With a city on the brink and truth as their weapon, can they topple the Order of the Eclipse before it buries them? Dive into a noir thriller where every clue is a trap and every shadow hides a killer. The fog rolled in from the bay like a thief, cloaking the streets of Bayport in a damp gray shroud. Nancy Drew stood at the edge of the pier, her auburn hair tucked beneath a navy beret, her sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon. The salty air stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Something was wrong. Her instincts, honed by years of unraveling mysteries, hummed like a taut wire. The telegram in her gloved hand crinkled as she reread it for the third time. Miss Drew, your presence is urgently requested in Los Angeles. A matter of grave importance. Details upon arrival. Discretion paramount. Signed, AV, no address, no phone number, just a time and place. Union Station, Los Angeles, tomorrow at noon. The initials AV meant nothing to her, and the vagueness of the message was as infuriating as it was intriguing. Nancy wasn't one to chase shadows, but the word grave had a weight that lingered. She'd solved enough cases to know that urgency often masked danger. Her roadster idled nearby, its engine a low growl against the lapping waves. She slipped the telegram into her coat pocket and turned toward the car, her heels clicking on the wet planks. A shadow moved in the fog, a figure lean and quick darting behind a stack of crates. Nancy froze, her hand instinctively brushing the small flashlight in her pocket. She wasn't armed, not tonight, but she didn't need a weapon to be dangerous. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady but sharp, cutting through the mist. Silence. The fog swallowed sound, leaving only the distant wail of a foghorn. She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. The crates loomed like tombstones in the haze. Then a scrape. Leather on wood, faint but unmistakable. Someone was there, watching her. Nancy's pulse quickened, but her mind stayed cool. She edged toward the crates, her flashlight now in hand, its beam slicing through the fog. The light caught a glint. Metal, maybe a watch or a belt buckle, before the figure bolted, footsteps pounding toward the alley beyond the pier. She gave chase, her athletic frame moving with practiced ease. But the fog was a traitor, hiding, her quarry in its folds. By the time she reached the alley, it was empty, save for a single clue, a matchbook, half sodden on the ground, emblazoned with the words, "The Gilded Cage, Los Angeles." She picked it up, her mind racing. Los Angeles, the telegram, the figure in the fog. Coincidence didn't sit well with Nancy Drew. Someone wanted her attention, and they had it. Half a continent away, Philip Marlowe slouched in his office chair, a cigarette dangling from his lips, the smoke curling toward the cracked ceiling of his Los Angeles office. The neon sign outside buzzed like a dying insect, casting red and blue flickers across the room. His desk was a battlefield of unpaid bills, empty whiskey bottles, and a single photograph. A dame who'd broken his heart and left him with nothing but memories and a bad habit. He didn't look at it anymore, but he hadn't thrown it out, either. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, its hands mocking his insomnia. Marlowe wasn't a man who slept easy, not with the city's underbelly clawing at his conscience. He was about to call it a night when the phone rang, its shrill cry jarring in the quiet. He let it ring twice, debating whether to ignore it. Trouble always came with late-night calls, and he'd had his fill of trouble lately. He picked up the receiver, his voice rough as gravel. "Marlowe. Mr. Marlowe," a woman's voice said, clipped and precise, with a faint English accent. "You don't know me, but I have a proposition. One that requires your particular talents." Marlowe leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Lady, it's late, and I'm not in the mood for games. Who are you, and what do you want?" "My name is unimportant for now," she replied, unruffled. But the matter is urgent. A situation has arisen in Los Angeles, one that threatens lives and reputations. I need someone who can navigate the shadows, someone who isn't afraid of getting their hands dirty. Marlowe took a drag on his cigarette, the ember flaring. Sounds like a job for the cops, not a private eye. The police, she said, her tone laced with disdain, are ill-equipped for this. Discretion is paramount, Mr. Marlowe. I've heard you're a man who can keep secrets. He snorted. You've heard wrong if you think I work blind. Give me a name, a place, something to chew on, or I'm hanging up. There was a pause, long enough that he thought she'd gone. Then softly, Union Station, noon tomorrow. You'll know who to look for. And Mr. Marlowe, don't be late. Lives depend on it. The line went dead. Marlowe stared at the receiver, his jaw tight. He didn't like being played, and this dame was playing him like a cheap violin. But the word lives stuck in his craw. He'd seen too many bodies in his line of work, too many eyes staring at nothing. If there was a chance to stop that, he'd take it, even if it meant walking into a trap. He stubbed out his cigarette and reached for his hat, the brim worn from years of hard use. The Gilded Cage was a joint he knew well, a glitzy nightclub with a dark heart, where the city's elite rubbed shoulders with its scum. If this job was tied to that place, it was going to get messy. Marlowe didn't mind messy, but he preferred to know who was holding the knife. In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The fire in the hearth cast a warm glow over the room, softening the edges of her sharp, bird-like features. To an outsider, she was just a frail old lady, her white hair neatly pinned, her hands busy with yarn. But those who knew her, really knew her, understood that Miss Marple's mind was a steel trap, catching secrets others missed. The letter had arrived that morning, delivered by the postman with his usual cheerful chatter. It was a curious thing, written on heavy cream paper, the handwriting elegant but hurried. No return address, just a postmark from Los Angeles. Miss Marple had read it twice, her lips pursing as she absorbed its contents. Dear Miss Marple, your reputation for insight precedes you. A crisis looms in Los Angeles, one that requires a keen mind and an unassuming presence. I beg you to join us at Union Station, noon, 2 days hence. Lives hang in the balance. Forgive my anonymity, all will be revealed. Yours, A.V. Miss Marple, set her knitting aside, her fingers still as she gazed out at the garden. The roses were in bloom, their petals vivid against the green, but her thoughts were far from St. Mary Mead. Los Angeles was a world away, a city of glamour and grit, where shadows hid more than village gossip. She'd never been one for travel, but the letter's urgency stirred something in her, a sense of duty perhaps, or simply the pull of a puzzle. She rose, moving with a spryness that belied her age, and crossed to the bookshelf. Her fingers traced the spines until she found what she sought, a slim volume on American cities dog-eared from her nephew's last visit. She flipped to the section on Los Angeles, her eyes skimming the pages. Hollywood, gangsters, sprawling, streets. It was a far cry from her quiet village, but human nature was the same everywhere. Greed, fear, love, betrayal. She'd seen it all, and she'd wager Los Angeles had no shortage of it. The clock chimed, and Miss Marple glanced at it, calculating. A flight from London to Los Angeles would take time, but she could make it. She'd need to pack lightly, nothing to draw attention. A spinster from St. Mary Mead could slip through a city unnoticed, her sharp eyes catching what others overlooked. As she folded the letter and tucked it into her handbag, a memory surfaced, her old friend Dolly Bantry, recounting a tale of a nightclub called the Gilded Cage, where secrets were currency and danger was a dance partner. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Coincidence, perhaps, but she didn't believe in it any more than Nancy Drew did. Its marble floors echoing with the clatter of footsteps and the hum of voices. Nancy Drew arrived early, her roadster parked a block away, her eyes scanning the crowd. She wore a tailored green suit, professional but unobtrusive, her beret tilted just so. The matchbook from the pier was tucked in her purse, its presence a nagging question. She'd spent the drive from Bayport turning over possibilities, but answers were scarce. Whoever AV was, they'd chosen a public place for this meeting, which meant they were either cautious or cunning. She stood near the ticket counter, her gaze flicking from face to face. Travelers hurried past, their suitcases bumping along, while porters shouted directions. A man in a trench coat lingered by a newsstand, his hat pulled low. Nancy's eyes narrowed. He was too still, too watchful. She made a mental note to keep him in her periphery. At precisely noon, a figure caught her attention. An older woman, small and prim, stepped into the concourse, her gray coat and sensible hat marking her as out of place amid the city's flash. She carried a carpet bag, her movements unhurried but purposeful. Nancy's instincts flared. This wasn't a tourist. This was someone who knew exactly where she was going. Before Nancy could approach, another figure cut through the crowd, a man tall and lean with a face that looked like it had seen too many fists and not enough sleep. His suit was rumpled, his fedora tilted at a defiant angle. Philip Marlowe. Nancy recognized him from the papers, a private eye with a reputation for trouble. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air crackled with mutual assessment. "You Drew?" Marlowe asked, his voice low, almost lost in the station's din. "Nancy," she confirmed, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes wary but curious. "Marlowe," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Got a feeling we're here for the same party." Before Nancy could reply, the older woman approached, her steps light but deliberate. "Miss Drew, Mr. Marlowe," she said, her voice soft but clear, with that same English accent Marlowe had heard on the phone. "I'm Jane Marple. I believe we've all been summoned by the same hand." Nancy's brow arched, but she didn't miss a beat. "AV, I presume?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "Indeed, though I suspect AV is not a person, but a cipher. Shall we find a quieter place to discuss this?" Marlowe glanced around, his jaw tightening as he spotted the man in the trench coat still loitering by the newsstand. "Yeah, let's move, we're drawing eyes." They found a corner cafe across from the station, its booths offering a semblance of privacy. Over coffee, black for Marlowe, cream and sugar for Nancy, tea for Miss Marple, they compared notes. 3 summons, 3 cities, 1 destination. The telegrams and letters shared the same urgency, the same cryptic tone. And then there was the matchbook Nancy produced, its gold lettering catching the light. "The gilded cage," Marlowe muttered, turning it over in his hands. "Bad news wrapped in sequins. That joint's a magnet for trouble." Miss Marple sipped, her tea, her eyes sharp. "I've heard of it. A place where secrets are traded like stocks. If our summons is tied to that establishment, we're dealing with something or someone deeply connected." Nancy leaned forward, her voice low. "Whoever sent these messages knows us, our reputations. They're not just asking for help. They're testing us. The question is why?" Marlowe lit a cigarette, the smoke curling upward. "And who's watching? That guy at the newsstand? He's no tourist. We're being tailed, and I'd bet my last dollar it's tied to this." Miss Marple's knitting needles appeared from her bag, clicking softly as she spoke. "A test, a tale, a nightclub with a dubious reputation. It's a puzzle, my dears, and puzzles have pieces. We must find the first one." Nancy's mind raced, piecing together the clues. The figure on the pier, the matchbook, the summons. It was a trail, and it led to the gilded cage. But trails could be traps, and she wasn't about to walk in blind. "Tonight," she said, her tone decisive, "we go to the gilded cage, together. If AV wants us, they'll find us there." Marlowe grinned, a rare flash of amusement. "Gutsy move, kid. I'm in." Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. "As am I. But we must be cautious. In my experience, those who hide in shadows rarely wish to be seen." As they left the cafe, the man in the trench coat was gone, but the weight of his presence lingered. The fog from Bayport seemed to have followed Nancy, curling around the edges of this new mystery. 3 detectives, 3 worlds, 1 summons. The game was afoot and none of them could turn back now. The neon glow of the gilded cage pulsed against the Los Angeles night, its golden sign a beacon for the city's dreamers and schemers. The nightclub sat on a corner of Sunset Boulevard, its Art Deco facade all sharp, angles and glitz, promising glamour to those who could afford it and trouble to those who couldn't. Nancy Drew pulled her roadster into a side street, the engine's rumble fading as she cut the ignition. She adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her own determined eyes before scanning the shadows for movement. The man in the trench coat from Union Station hadn't reappeared, but her instincts told her he wasn't far. She stepped out, her emerald cocktail dress catching the streetlight's gleam, a deliberate choice blending sophistication with the ability to move fast if needed. Her purse held the matchbook from the pier, a flashlight, and a notepad, her tools as vital as any weapon. Nancy didn't believe in guns, but she believed in preparation. Philip Marlowe leaned against a lamppost across the street, his cigarette a faint ember in the dark. His suit was the same rumpled one from earlier, but he'd swapped his fedora for a sharper model, its brim casting half his face in shadow. He watched the crowd spilling into the club, starlets in furs, tycoons in tuxedos, and the occasional lowlife trying to pass as high society. Marlowe knew this world too well. It was a chessboard where every move hit a knife. "You clean up nice, Drew," he said as Nancy approached, his voice a low drawl. "But this ain't a cotillion. You sure you're ready for what's inside?" Nancy's lips curved, but her eyes stayed sharp. "I've handled worse than a nightclub, Marlowe. The question is, can you keep up?" He chuckled, a dry sound that held no warmth. "Kid, I was dodging bullets while you were still in pigtails. Let's just hope our English friend doesn't knit us into a corner." As if on cue, Miss Jane Marple emerged from a taxi, her gray coat replaced by a modest but elegant black dress, a cameo brooch at her throat. She carried a small clutch, her knitting tucked away for now, though Nancy suspected those needles were never far. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unyielding, took in the scene with the precision of a hawk. "Good evening," she said, her tone as calm as if they were meeting for tea in St. Mary Mead. "Quite a lively place, isn't it? I suspect we'll find more than dancing inside." Marlowe tipped his hat. "Lively's one word for it. Trouble's another. Stick close, Miss Marple. This crowd bites." Miss Marple's smile was serene but knowing. "Oh, Mr. Marlowe, I've dealt with sharper teeth than these. Shall we?" The trio crossed the street, blending into the throng at the entrance. The doorman, a hulking figure with a scar across his jaw, eyed them, but waved them through after a glance at Nancy's confident smile. Inside, the gilded cage was a sensory assault. Jazz horns wailed from a band on a raised stage, their notes weaving through laughter and clinking glasses. Chandeliers dripped crystal, casting fractured light over velvet booths and a dance floor packed with swaying bodies. The air smelled of perfume, cigar smoke, and something darker, like secrets left to fester. Nancy's gaze swept the room, cataloging details. A politician whispering to a woman who wasn't his wife. A gambler sweating through his suit. A waitress, moving with the careful grace of someone who knew too much. She felt the weight of eyes on them. Not hostile, not yet, but curious. They were strangers in a place that thrived on familiarity, and that made them a puzzle. Marlowe steered them toward a booth in the corner, its high back offering a shield from prying eyes. "We're here to be seen," he muttered, sliding in beside Nancy. "But let's not make it too easy for whoever's watching." Miss Marple settled across from them, her clutch resting on the table. "I agree. Our mysterious AV has orchestrated this meeting, but they'll reveal themselves only when they're ready. Until then, we observe." Nancy nodded, her fingers brushing the matchbook in her purse. "The summons brought us here, but that matchbook from the pier, it's a breadcrumb. Someone wanted me to connect Bayport to this place. We need to find out why." Marlowe lit another cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his weathered face. "Could be a setup. This joint's got more rats than a sewer, and not the kind that scurry. If AV's playing us, they've got the home advantage." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the crowd, her expression thoughtful. Or perhaps AV is desperate. In my experience, anonymity cloaks fear as often as deceit. Whoever they are, they've gone to great lengths to assemble us. That suggests a problem too complex or too dangerous for one mind alone. Their conversation paused as a waitress approached, her red lips curved in a practiced smile. "Drinks?" she asked, her voice smooth but her eyes darting as if weighing them. "Whiskey neat," Marlowe said, his tone flat. "Ginger ale," Nancy added, wanting her wit sharp. "Tea, if you have it," Miss Marple said, her smile polite but probing. "Earl Grey, perhaps?" The waitress blinked, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." She moved off, her hips swaying, but Nancy caught the way her hand lingered near her apron pocket as if checking something. "She's nervous," Nancy murmured. "And not about the drink order." Marlowe's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, she's carrying more than a notepad. Keep an eye on her." The band struck up a new tune, a sultry number that pulled more couples to the dance floor. Nancy scanned the room again, her gaze snagging on a man at the bar. He was older, silver-haired, his tuxedo impeccable, but his hands trembled as he lifted his glass. He kept glancing toward a curtained alcove at the far end of the club where shadows moved behind the velvet. "Marlowe," Nancy said softly, nodding toward the man. 10 o'clock, he's scared. Marlowe followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "That's Victor Langston. Big shot producer, owns half the studios in town. If he's spooked, it's not over a bad script." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that alcove he's watching, notice the man guarding it? He's not a waiter nor a guest. His posture suggests authority." Nancy's pulse quickened. The guard was broad-shouldered, his suit straining at the seams, his eyes cold as they swept the room. He stood like a sentinel, one hand resting near his hip, where a gun might be holstered. The alcove behind him was a black hole in the club's glitter, a place where secrets could hide. "We need to get closer," Nancy said, her mind already mapping the room. "If AV is here, that alcove's a good bet." Marlowe snorted. "And walk into a lion's den? You got guts, Drew, I'll give you that. But we need a plan, not a suicide pact." Miss Marple's fingers tapped her clutch, a faint rhythm. A distraction, perhaps. Something to draw the guard's attention without raising suspicion. Nancy's eyes lit up. "I can handle that. Marlowe, you and Miss Marple get to the alcove. I'll make sure the guard's looking the other way." Marlowe studied her, then nodded. "All right, kid. Don't get yourself killed. I'd hate to. Explain that to your fan club back in Bayport." Nancy flashed a grin, already sliding out of the booth. "Worry about yourself, Marlowe. I've got this." She moved toward the dance floor, her steps confident but calculated. The crowd parted for her, drawn by her poise, and she let herself blend into the rhythm of the music. A young man in a sharp suit caught her eye, his smile eager. She returned, it letting him pull her into a dance. Her movements fluid, but her focus razor-sharp. As they spun, she maneuvered closer to the bar, where Victor Langston still nursed his drink, his eyes darting to the alcove. Nancy's partner leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Haven't seen you here before," he said, his voice slick. "You with the studio crowd?" "Just passing through," she replied, her tone light but her eyes on Langston. She twirled, using the motion to bump against a waiter carrying a tray of glasses. The tray wobbled and she gasped, loud enough to draw heads. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, steadying the waiter with one hand while nudging the tray with the other. Glasses crashed to the floor, the sound cutting through the music. The crowd turned, the guard by the alcove stiffened, and Nancy caught Marlowe's nod as he and Miss Marple slipped toward the curtain. The waiter muttered an apology, but Nancy was already moving, her eyes on Langston. He'd flinched at the crash, his drink spilling, and now he was heading for the exit, his face pale. Nancy's instincts screamed to follow, but she couldn't abandon her distraction. She glanced at the guard. He was stepping away from the alcove, his attention on the commotion. Perfect. Marlowe and Miss Marple reached the curtain, moving with a speed that belied the older woman's age. Marlowe parted the velvet, his hand hovering near his coat pocket where Nancy suspected a revolver hid. Miss Marple followed, Her clutch clutched tightly, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond. Inside the alcove, a narrow hallway stretched into shadow lit by a single bulb that flickered like a dying star. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of cigar smoke and something metallic. Blood, Marlowe realized, his gut twisting. He gestured for Miss Marple to stay behind him, but she ignored him, her steps soft but unwavering. "Mr. Marlowe," she whispered, "do you notice the walls? Scratches, fresh ones. Someone was here, and not willingly." Marlowe's eyes narrowed, catching the marks, jagged, desperate, like nails clawing for freedom. "Yeah, this ain't a VIP lounge. Stay sharp." The hallway ended at a door, heavy oak with a brass lock. Marlowe tested the handle, locked, but the mechanism felt loose, like it had been tampered with. He knelt, pulling a small tool from his pocket, his fingers working with practiced ease. Miss Marple watched, her expression unreadable but her eyes alive with curiosity. "You've done this before," she remarked, her tone almost amused. Marlowe grunted. "Comes with the territory. You gonna lecture me, or keep lookout?" She smiled faintly, turning to watch the hallway. "I find lectures rarely improve a situation, Mr. Marlowe, but do hurry. I suspect our time is short." The lock clicked, and Marlowe eased the door open, revealing a small office. A desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with papers, a half-empty bottle of bourbon and a telephone. But it was the floor that stopped them cold. A dark stain, still wet, spreading across the hardwood. Blood, fresh and unmistakable. Miss Marple's breath caught, but her voice remained steady. "Oh dear, it seems we've stumbled into something rather serious." Marlowe crouched, his fingers hovering over the stain. "No body, but this much blood? Someone didn't walk away." He scanned the desk, his eyes landing on a photograph tucked under a paperweight, a woman, young and striking, her eyes wide, with fear. He slipped it into his pocket, his jaw tight. Miss Marple moved to the desk, her gloved hands deft as she sifted through the papers. Bills, receipts, and this. She held up a ledger, its pages filled with names, dates, and numbers. A record of transactions, perhaps, or debts. "Look at the last entry. AV, delivery confirmed, payment pending." Marlowe's eyes darkened. "Our mystery callers got their fingers in this. Question is, what's the delivery?" Before Miss Marple could reply, a shout echoed from the hallway, followed by the thud of boots. Marlowe cursed under his breath, shoving the ledger into his coat. "Time's up. Move." They slipped back into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind them. The guard was back at his post, but his attention was on the dance floor, where Nancy was still playing her part, laughing with her dance partner while steering him toward the bar. Marlowe and Miss Marple emerged from the alcove, blending into the crowd just as the guard turned. Nancy caught their return, her eyes flicking to Marlowe's grim expression. She excused herself from the dance, weaving through the crowd to rejoin them at the booth. "Well?" she asked, her voice low. Marlowe slid the photograph across the table. "Trouble. Blood on the floor. No body. And this dame, she's part of it." Nancy studied the photo, her mind racing. The woman's face was familiar, though she couldn't place it. "And the ledger?" she asked, catching Miss Marple's nod. "A clue," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but urgent. "But not the whole picture. AV is involved, but whether as victim or villain we cannot yet say." Nancy's fingers tightened on the matchbook. "Langston was heading for the exit. He knows something. We need to find him before he disappears." Marlowe stubbed out his cigarette, his eyes hard. "Agreed. But we're not alone in this game. That guard's not just muscle, he's connected. And if he saw us, we're marked." Miss Marple's needles reappeared, clicking softly. "Then we must be cleverer than our adversaries. Mr. Langston, the ledger, this poor woman in the photograph, they're pieces of our puzzle. But puzzles, my dears, are solved one step at a time." Nancy's gaze drifted to the alcove, her pulse steady but her mind alight. The gilded cage was a trap, a stage, a battlefield. AV had brought them here, but for what? To solve a crime, or to become part of one? She didn't know, but she'd find out. She always did. As they rose to leave, the waitress returned, her smile gone. She set a tray on the table, whiskey, ginger ale, and a teapot. But tucked beneath the teapot was a note, its edges crisp, the handwriting familiar. You're close, but not close enough. Find Langston. Trust no one. A.V. Nancy's eyes met Marlowe's, then Miss Marple's. The game had just gotten deadlier, and they were all in too deep to turn back. Restless and predatory, its pulse thrumming through the streets. Philip Marlowe drove his battered Ford through the city's veins, the engine's growl a counterpoint to the distant wail of sirens. The neon haze of Sunset Boulevard had faded behind them, replaced by the grimmier edges of downtown, where shadows clung to alleyways and trust was a luxury no one could afford. In the passenger seat, Nancy Drew sat with the photograph, from the gilded cage in her lap, her fingers tracing the woman's frightened eyes. Behind her, Miss Jane Marple was a quiet presence, her knitting needles silent for once, her gaze fixed on the passing city, as if it were a puzzle she could solve by staring. Marlowe's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. The note from A.V., find Langston, trust no one, burned in his mind, its words a warning and a challenge. Victor Langston, the silver-haired producer they'd seen at the club, had vanished into the night, his fear a beacon they couldn't ignore. The blood in the alcove, the ledger with A.V.'s name, the photograph of the terrified woman, it was a tangle of clues, each one sharper than the last. Marlowe didn't like tangles, but he liked being played even less. You think Langston's running? Nancy asked, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine. Her auburn hair was tucked beneath a scarf, her green eyes sharp in the dashboard's glow. Running or hiding, Marlowe replied, his voice rough as the road. Guys like Langston don't spook easy. Whatever's got him jumping, it's big. Miss Marple leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap. And dangerous, she added, her tone soft but weighted. The blood in that office suggests violence, perhaps murder. Mr. Langston's fear may be less about guilt than survival. Nancy nodded, her mind racing. The matchbook from the Bayport Pier, the summons that brought them to Los Angeles. The ledger's cryptic entries, they were pieces of a machine, but the gears wouldn't mesh. Not yet. A.V. wants us to find Langston, she said. But why? If they're pulling the strings, what's their endgame? Marlowe snorted, flicking ash from his cigarette out the window. Endgame's always the same, power, money, or revenge. Pick your poison. A.V.'s got us dancing, but I'm not fond of the tune. Miss Marple's lips curved, a faint smile that held no warmth. In my experience, Mr. Marlowe, those who hide their motives are often the most desperate. A.V. may be a puppet master, but puppets can be cut loose. The car slowed as they approached Langston's office, a sleek building in the heart of Hollywood, its glass facade reflecting the city's restless light. The lot was empty, the security gate locked, but Marlowe wasn't one for invitations. He parked a block away, his eyes scanning for tails. The man in the trench coat from Union Station hadn't resurfaced, but Marlowe felt the weight of unseen eyes, like a noose tightening. Stay sharp, he muttered, slipping a lockpick from his coat. This place will be wired tight. Nancy stepped out, her heels silent on the pavement, her flashlight a slim shadow in her hand. I've handled locks before, Marlowe. Let's make this quick. Miss Marple followed, her black dress blending with the night, her clutch held like a shield. Quickly, yes, she said, but carefully. Desperate men leave traps. The gate's lock yielded to Marlowe's skill, the mechanism clicking open with a grudging sigh. They slipped inside, the building looming above them, its windows dark as blind eyes. Nancy's flashlight swept the courtyard, catching glints of glass and metal. Nothing out of place. But the silence was wrong, too heavy for an empty lot. Back, entrance, Marlowe said, leading them to a service door. The lock was newer, sturdier, but Nancy knelt beside him, her own tools flashing in the dark. Together they worked the pins, their movements synchronized, a silent conversation of skill. The door opened, revealing a hallway that smelled of polish and ambition. Langston's office was on the top floor, a corner suite with a view of the city's glittering sprawl. The elevator was a risk they didn't take. The The stairs were slower, but safer. Nancy led the way, her steps light, her senses tuned to every creak and shadow. Marlowe followed, his hand near his revolver while Miss Marple brought up the rear, her breath steady despite the climb. The office door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hall. Nancy froze, her hand raised, signaling caution. Marlowe's eyes narrowed, his gun now in hand, its weight a cold comfort. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her clutch, her expression unreadable but alert. Marlowe nudged the door open, the hinges silent. The office was a shrine to ego, mahogany desk, leather chairs, posters of Langston's films framed in gold. But the room was a crime scene waiting to be named. Papers were scattered across the floor, drawers yanked open, a safe in the corner gaping like a wound, and on the desk a single object stood out, a brass key, its surface etched with a symbol, a circle bisected by a line, like a coin split in two. Nancy's pulse quickened. "Someone's been here," she said, her voice low. And they weren't subtle. Marlowe holstered his gun, his eyes scanning the chaos. Langston or someone looking for him. Either way, they're scared. Miss Marple crossed to the desk, her gloved hand hovering over the key. "This symbol," she murmured. "It's not decorative. It's a message. I've seen its like before in a case involving a secret society. They use such marks to identify their own." Nancy's brow arched. "A secret society? In Hollywood?" Miss Marple's eyes met hers, sharp and knowing. "My dear, where there is power, there are those who hoard it. Hollywood is no village, but its secrets are no less deadly." Marlowe picked up the key, turning it in the light. It was heavy, old, the kind that opened something more than a door. If this is a clue, it's a damn cryptic one. Langston's not here, but he left. This or someone did. Nancy moved to the safe, her flashlight probing its depths. Empty, save for a single envelope, its flap torn. She pulled it out, her fingers careful, and slid a photograph from inside. It was the same woman from the club's picture, but this time she was smiling, her arm around a man whose face was scratched out. On the back, in hurried scrawl, "They know. Run." "They," Nancy said, her voice tight. "AV? Or someone else?" Marlowe's jaw clenched. "Could be both. Langston's tied to this dame, and she's tied to trouble. That blood in the club, hers maybe." Miss Marple studied the photograph, her lips pursing. "Or his. But this defacement, this violence to the image, it's personal. Whoever did this was angry. Betrayed, perhaps." Nancy's mind raced, connecting dots. The matchbook, the summons, the ledger, the blood, the key, the photograph. AV was the thread, but the needle was missing. "We need to find Langston," she said. "He's the only one who can explain this." Marlowe snorted. "If he's still breathing. Guys like him don't last long when the wolves are out." A sound broke the silence. A footstep, heavy, in the hall. Marlowe's gun was out in an instant. Nancy's flashlight snapping off, Miss Marple stepping into the shadows. They moved as one, silent, their training a shared language. The footsteps stopped, then retreated. But the air was thicker now, charged with threat. "They're gone," Nancy whispered, her eyes on the door. "But they'll be back." Marlowe nodded, slipping the key into his pocket. "We've got what we came for, let's move." They retraced their steps. The stairs a gauntlet of echoes, the courtyard a trap waiting to spring. The car was where they'd left it, but a new detail caught Nancy's eye. A cigarette butt, fresh, near the gate. Someone had been watching. Marlowe saw it too, his expression grim. Our friend in the trench coat, maybe, or a new player. Miss Marple's voice was calm but urgent. "We must assume we're compromised. Every step we take is watched." They piled into the car, Marlowe gunning the engine as they pulled into the night. Nancy held the photograph, her mind turning over the scratched-out face. Miss Marple's words about betrayal lingered, a warning of human nature's darker edges. Marlowe's silence was a storm, his thoughts as tangled as the city's streets. Their next move was a gamble. Langston's mansion in the hills, a fortress of wealth and secrets. If he was hiding, It was the logical place. If he was dead, they'd find answers in his absence. But the key in Marlowe's pocket was a wild card, its symbol a lock they hadn't yet found. As they drove, Nancy's thoughts drifted to Bayport, to the figure in the fog. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it was the start of this chain, a chain now pulling them deeper into danger. Marlowe's cigarette glowed, Miss Marple's hands were still, and the city watched, its eyes everywhere. The mansion loomed ahead, its gates barred, its lights dim. Nancy's heart steadied, her resolve iron. Marlowe's grip on the wheel was a promise of action. Miss Marple's silence was a map of unseen paths. The cryptic clue was in their hands, but the truth was still a shadow, and shadows had teeth. The Hollywood hills rose like sentinels, their dark silhouettes jagged against the starless sky. Victor Langston's mansion perched on a ridge, a monument to excess, its white stucco walls glowing faintly under the moon. Iron gates barred the entrance, their spikes glinting like teeth, and the driveway wound upward, shrouded by eucalyptus trees that whispered in the night breeze. Philip Marlowe eased his Ford to a stop 100 yards from the gate, killing the engine to let the silence settle. The city's pulse was fainter here, but its menace lingered, a low hum in the air. Nancy Drew sat in the passenger seat, her green eyes scanning the mansion's windows. Most were dark, but a single light flickered on the second floor, erratic, like a signal or a trap. She held the defaced photograph from Langston's office. The woman's smile a ghost beneath the scratched-out face of her companion. The brass key, now in Marlowe's pocket, felt like a weight on her mind, its cryptic symbol, a lock without a door. AV's note, "Find Langston, trust no one," was a drumbeat urging them forward. But Nancy's instincts screamed caution. Shadows didn't just hide. They hunted. Miss Jane Marple sat in the back, her hands folded over her clutch, her expression serene but her eyes alive with calculation. The city was foreign to her, its sprawl a far cry from St. Mary Mead's tidy lanes, but its secrets were familiar. Greed, fear, betrayal, she'd seen them all, and this mansion, with its guarded gates and flickering light, was a stage for all three. Marlowe lit a cigarette, the flare of the match briefly illuminating his weathered face. "Place looks quiet," he said, his voice a low growl. "Too quiet. Langston's either holed up or long gone." Nancy's fingers tightened on the photograph. "That light's no accident. Someone's here and they want us to know it." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. "Or they don't know we're coming. A desperate man leaves signs, my dears, even when he means to hide. We must be prepared for anything." Marlowe snorted, exhaling smoke. "Anything's my specialty, Miss Marple. But if Langston's in there, he's not alone. That cigarette butt at his office? Someone's tailing us, and they're not amateurs." Nancy nodded, her mind turning over the clues. The figure on the Bayport pier, the man in the trench coat at Union Station, the guard at the gilded cage, the fresh cigarette butt. They were threads in a web, and AV was either the spider or the prey. "We need answers," she said, her tone resolute. "Langston's our best shot, let's get inside." Marlowe stubbed out his cigarette, his hand brushing the revolver under his coat. "Gutsy, Drew. Hope you've got a plan to go with that nerve." Nancy's lips curved, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Always. We scale the wall, avoid the gate. Less chance of tripping an alarm." Miss Marple's brow arched, but her smile was approving. "Resourceful, Miss Drew, but do take care. Walls have eyes as well as ears." They slipped from the car, moving like shadows across the road. The wall surrounding the estate was high, topped with shards of glass that caught the moonlight. But Nancy had climbed worse. She found a section where the eucalyptus branches hung low, offering cover, and tested the stone for handholds. Marlowe followed, his movements less graceful but steady, while Miss Marple surprised them both, her small frame navigating the climb with a spryness that belied her age. On the other side, they crouched in the garden, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. The mansion loomed closer now, its silence oppressive. Nancy's flashlight stayed off, her eyes adjusting to the dark as she led them toward a side entrance. A servant's door, less likely to be wired. Marlowe worked the lock, his tools flashing, while Nancy kept watch, her pulse steady but her senses razor-sharp. Miss Marple stood beside her, her clutch a quiet anchor, her gaze sweeping the grounds. The lock clicked, and the door opened into a kitchen, its stainless steel gleaming faintly. The air was stale, the counters bare, as if no one had cooked here in days. Nancy's flashlight flicked on, its beam low, revealing a hallway beyond. They moved silently, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The mansion's opulence, a stark contrast to the danger humming beneath it. The flickering light came from the second floor, and they found a staircase, its mahogany banister polished to a mirror sheen. Nancy took the lead, her hand brushing the wall for balance, her ears straining for any sound. Marlowe's gun was out, its barrel a dark promise, while Miss Marple's steps were soft, her clutch held like a talisman. At the top, a corridor stretched left and right, lined with doors. The light spilled from a room at the far end, its door half open, the flicker now clearly a candle, its flame dancing in an unseen draft. Nancy's heart quickened, but her mind stayed cool. She gestured for Marlowe to take point, his gun a better shield than her flashlight. Marlowe edged forward, his back to the wall, his eyes locked on the door. Nancy followed, her flashlight now in her pocket, her hands free for whatever came next. Miss Marple brought up the rear, her silence a steadying force, her eyes catching details the others missed. Scratches on the floor, a faint smear of dirt, signs of a struggle. The room was a study, its walls lined with books, its desk a twin to the one in Langston's office. The candle sat on a side table, its wax pooling, but the room was empty. No Langston, no body, just the oppressive weight of absence. Nancy's eyes swept the space, landing on a painting above the desk, a portrait of a woman, the same woman from the photographs, her eyes now serene, her smile a lie. "That's her," Nancy said, her voice low. "But this painting, it's older. She's been part of Langston's world for years." Marlowe holstered his gun, his jaw tight. "Yeah, and someone wants her erased. That scratched-out face? Someone hates her, or what she knows." Miss Marple approached the desk, her gloved hands deft as she examined its surface. "And this," she said, lifting a small notebook, its pages filled with hurried scrawl. "Dates, names, locations. Look, A.V., meeting, Gilded Cage, 10th. That was 3 days ago." Nancy's mind raced. 3 days ago, she'd been in Bayport chasing shadows on the pier. The matchbook, the telegram, the summons, it all pointed here, to this moment. A.V. met Langston at the club, she said. But what went wrong? Marlowe flipped through the notebook, his eyes narrowing. Plenty. Half these names are crossed out like a hit list. And this, Vault, Sunset Tower, key required. That brass key's looking less cryptic by the minute. Miss Marple's fingers paused on the notebook, her expression grave. A vault suggests secrets or treasures, and secrets, my dears, are worth killing for. A sound shattered the silence. A crash downstairs like glass breaking. Marlowe's gun was out again, Nancy's flashlight snapping off. Miss Marple stepping into the shadows. They moved as one back to the corridor, their breaths shallow, their senses straining. The crash was followed by footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the kitchen. "Company," Marlowe muttered, his voice a blade. "Stay low." Nancy's heart pounded, but her mind was a steel trap. "They're searching," she whispered. "They know we're here." Miss Marple's voice was calm, almost serene. "Or they're looking for the same thing we are. We mustn't assume they're enemies. Not yet." Marlowe snorted softly. "Lady, in my world, everyone's an enemy until proven otherwise." They crept down the stairs, Marlowe leading, his gun a steady extension of his will. The kitchen was empty, but a window was shattered, glass glittering on the floor. Nancy's flashlight swept the room, catching a glint. Another cigarette butt, identical to the one at Langston's office. Her pulse quickened. The same watcher or a new one? "Outside," Marlowe said, his voice low. "They're circling." They slipped through the servants' door, the night air sharp against their skin. The garden was a maze of shadows, the eucalyptus trees swaying, their leaves a chorus of whispers. Nancy's eyes darted, catching movement. A figure, tall and lean, moving toward the gate. Not Langston, but someone who moved with purpose, a predator's grace. Marlowe gestured, and they followed, keeping to the shadows. The figure reached the gate, pausing to light a cigarette, the match's flare revealing a face, hard, angular, with eyes that gleamed like a wolf's. The man in the trench coat from Union Station. Nancy's breath caught, but she stayed still, her mind cataloging details. He was alone, but his posture suggested readiness, a man expecting trouble. He tossed the cigarette, its ember glowing briefly, then slipped through the gate, disappearing into the night. "He's our tail," Marlowe said, his voice grim. "And he's good. Too good." Nancy's fingers brushed the photograph in her pocket. "He's after Langston, or the key. We need to beat him to the Sunset Tower." Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her voice steady. "And we must be cautious. This man is no mere thug. He's part of something larger, something that binds A.V. Langston and that poor woman." They retraced their steps to the car, the mansion's light still flickering behind them, a beacon of unanswered questions. Marlowe drove, his hand steady but his mind a storm. Nancy studied the notebook, its pages a map of secrets, while Miss Marple sat in silence, her thoughts a labyrinth only she could navigate. The Sunset Tower was a mile away, a sleek monolith of Art Deco grandeur, its spire piercing the sky. If the vault held answers, it also held danger, and the man in the trench coat was a shadow they couldn't shake. The brass key was a promise, the photograph a warning, and A.V.'s note a chain, binding them to a truth that might destroy them. As they neared the tower, the city's lights blurred, a kaleidoscope of ambition and despair. Nancy's resolve was iron, Marlowe's cynicism a shield, Miss Marple's wisdom a lantern. The shadows in the city were closing in, and they were running out of time. The Sunset Tower loomed over Los Angeles like a sentinel, its Art Deco spire a needle against the pre-dawn sky. Its marble facade gleamed faintly, reflecting the city's restless lights, but the shadows at its base were thick, hiding secrets in their folds. Philip Marlowe parked his Ford in an alley a block away, the engine's rumble fading into the night's hum. His cigarette was a faint ember, its smoke curling upward as he scanned the street. The man in the trench coat hadn't reappeared since Langston's mansion, but Marlowe's gut told him the bastard was close, watching, waiting. Nancy Drew sat beside him, the notebook from the mansion open on her lap, its pages filled with cryptic scrawl, names, dates, and the tantalizing mention of a vault. The brass key now in Marlowe's pocket was a puzzle piece that didn't yet fit, its etched symbol, a circle bisected by a line, haunting her thoughts. The defaced photograph of the woman, her companion's face scratched out, was tucked. In her purse, its warning, "They know, run," a pulse in her mind. A.V.'s note from the gilded cage, "Find Langston. Trust no one," was a chain, binding them to a truth that felt closer with every step, yet maddeningly out of reach. Miss Jane Marple sat in the back, her clutch resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on the tower as if it were a chessboard. The city's chaos was alien to her, but its human undercurrents, greed, fear, betrayal, were as familiar as the lanes of St. Mary Mead. The notebook's mention of a vault had stirred memories of a case long ago, a secret society that marked its treasures with symbols like the one on the key. She hadn't spoken of it yet, but her silence was a gathering storm, her thoughts weaving connections the others couldn't see. Marlowe stubbed out his cigarette, his voice a low growl. "Place looks like a fortress. If that vault's inside, it's guarded, cameras, locks, maybe muscle." Nancy's eyes traced the tower's silhouette, her mind mapping possibilities. The notebook said, "Sunset Tower, key required. The key's our ticket, but we need to find the vault first. Langston's connected. He'd have access to something secure, maybe a private safe." Miss Marple's voice was soft, but it cut through the tension. "And we must consider why A.V. wants us to find it. Are we their agents or their pawns? The distinction matters, my dears. Marlowe snorted, his hand brushing the revolver under his coat. Pawns don't carry guns. Miss Marple, whoever's playing this game, they're not calling all the shots. Nancy's lips curved, a spark of defiance in her gaze. Then let's change the rules. We go in, find the vault, and get answers. But we do it quietly. No alarms, no bodies. Marlowe's brow arched, a rare glint of amusement in his eyes. Quiet's not my style, Drew, but I'll try. For you. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. Discretion is a virtue, Mr. Marlowe, and in a place like this it may be our only shield. They slipped from the car, moving like ghosts, through the alley. The tower's service entrance was their target, a steel door tucked behind a loading dock less likely to be monitored. Nancy's flashlight stayed off, her eyes adjusting to the dark as she led the way, her steps silent. On the pavement, Marlowe followed, his lockpick ready, while Miss Marple brought up the rear, her small frame a quiet force, her clutch held like a talisman. The door's lock was modern, a challenge even for Marlowe's skill, but Nancy knelt beside him, her own tools flashing. Their hands moved in sync, a dance of precision, the lock yielding with a soft click. The door opened into a maintenance corridor, its concrete walls cold, its air heavy with the scent of oil and metal. A hum of machinery vibrated faintly, the tower's heartbeat. Nancy's pulse steadied, her senses sharp. Basement, she whispered. Vaults are usually below ground, secure and hidden. Marlowe nodded, his gun a shadow in his hand. Stay close, this place'll have eyes. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the ceiling, catching the glint of a camera lens, its red light dark. Not tonight, it seems. Someone has disabled the security, or wants us to think so. The corridor led to a stairwell, its steps descending into darkness. Nancy took the lead, her flashlight's beam low, sweeping for traps. Marlowe's gun was a steady presence, while Miss Marple's steps were soft, her gaze catching details. Scuff. Marks on the floor, a discarded keycard, signs of recent passage. The air grew colder as they descended, the hum louder, a mechanical pulse that set Nancy's nerves on edge. The basement was a labyrinth of storage rooms and utility closets, but a heavy steel door at the far end stood out, its surface unmarked, save for a small slot the size of the brass key. Nancy's heart quickened, but her mind stayed cool. "This is it," she said, her voice low. Marlowe handed her the key, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Your move, Drew. But if this is a trap, we're in deep." Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her clutch, her voice calm but urgent. "Be cautious, Miss Drew. A key opens doors, but it also unlocks consequences." Nancy nodded, sliding the key into the slot. It fit perfectly, the mechanism clicking as she turned it. The door groaned open, revealing a small chamber, its walls lined with safety deposit boxes, their steel faces gleaming under a single bulb. In the center, a table held a single item, a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with the same symbol as the key. Nancy's breath caught, but she moved forward, her gloved hands lifting the journal. Its pages were dense with handwriting, diagrams and lists, names, transactions, and coded phrases. One entry stood out: AV to deliver package, gilded cage, 10th, Langston to secure. Failure unacceptable. Marlowe's jaw tightened as he read over her shoulder. Package, that's what got the blood spilled. Langston's in this up to his neck. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her voice soft but piercing. And AV is the architect. But look, there at the bottom. Package compromised. Seekers dispatched. Nancy's mind raced. Seekers, us? Or the man in the trench coat? Before Marlowe could answer, a sound echoed from the corridor. A faint scrape, like a shoe on concrete. His gun snapped up. Nancy's flashlight flicked off, Miss Marple stepping into the shadows. They moved as one back to the door, their breaths shallow, their senses straining. The scrape came again, closer, deliberate. "Someone's here," Nancy whispered, her voice a thread. Marlowe's eyes were hard, his gun steady. "Stay behind me. If it's our tail, he's not walking away." Miss Marple's hand rested on Nancy's arm, her voice barely audible. "Patience, Mr. Marlowe. We may learn more by listening than by shooting." The scrape stopped, replaced by silence, heavy and oppressive. Then a voice, low, male, with a hint of amusement. "You're good, I'll give you that. But you're chasing ghosts." Marlowe's grip tightened, his voice a growl. "Show yourself or I start shooting through walls." A chuckle, then footsteps retreating fast. Nancy's instincts screamed to pursue, but Marlowe's hand on her shoulder held her back. "Let him go," he muttered. "He's baiting us. We've got what we came for." Nancy's jaw clenched, but she nodded, slipping the journal into her purse. The voice was new, not the man in the trench coat, but it carried the same menace. The vault had given them answers, but it had also painted a target on their backs. They retraced their steps. The stairwell a gauntlet of echoes, the corridor a trap, waiting to spring. The alley was empty, the car untouched, but a new detail caught Nancy's eye. A playing card, an ace of spades, tucked under the windshield wiper. On its back, in sharp black ink, AV sees all. Marlowe's curse was a low hiss. "They're toying with us. This whole damn city's their board." Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her voice steady. "Then we must play smarter, my dears. This journal is a map, but maps lead to danger as often as treasure." Nancy's resolve hardened, her mind turning over the journal's entries. The package, the seekers, AV's shadow over it all. They needed a moment to breathe, to think, to piece together the puzzle before the city's jaws closed around them. "We need a safe place," she said, her tone decisive. "Somewhere to read this journal, plan our next move. Somewhere AV can't reach." Marlowe's lips twitched a grim smile. "Safe's a tall order, Drew, but I know a spot. Old diner, off the grid. Owner owes me a favor." Miss Marple nodded, her clutch a quiet anchor. "A cup of tea would do wonders, Mr. Marlowe, and a clear head will do more." They drove through the city's veins, the tower's spire fading, behind them. The diner was a relic, its neon sign flickering, its booths worn but warm. The owner, a grizzled man named Joe, waved them to a corner table, no questions asked. Coffee for Marlowe, ginger ale for Nancy, tea for Miss Marple. Earl, gray, brewed properly to her quiet delight. The journal lay open between them, its pages a labyrinth of secrets. Nancy read aloud, her voice steady, cataloging names, politicians, studio heads, a few Marlowe recognized from the underworld. The package was mentioned repeatedly, but never defined, its delivery tied to the Gilded Cage, Langston, and AV. The coded phrases were a wall, but Miss Marple's eyes lit up, her fingers tracing a line. "This code," she said, her voice soft but certain. "It's a substitution cipher. I've seen its like in a smuggling case years ago. With time I can crack it." Marlowe's brow arched, a spark of respect in his gaze. "You're full of surprises, Miss Marple. How long?" "A few hours," she replied, her smile faint. "But we must be cautious. These names, some are powerful, others dangerous. The package, whatever it is, threatens them all." Nancy's mind turned over the ace of spades, AV's taunt. "They're watching us, but they're also afraid. That card? It's a warning, but it's also a slip. They're not untouchable." The diner's door jangled, and a woman entered. Tall, brunette, her coat too heavy for the LA night. She glanced their way, her eyes lingering, then took a seat at the counter. Marlowe's hand rested near his gun. Nancy's senses sharpened. Miss Marple's needles appeared, clicking softly. "She's not here for coffee," Marlowe muttered, his voice low. Nancy studied the woman, catching the way her hand trembled as she lit a cigarette. "She's nervous. Maybe she's running like Langston." Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her voice a whisper. "Or she's a messenger. Look, her purse. The same symbol as the key, embossed on the clasp." Nancy's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm. "We approach her carefully. She might know where Langston is." Marlowe's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "All right, Drew. You take the lead. I'll cover you." Nancy slid from the booth, her movements smooth, her Smile disarming. The woman looked up as she approached, her eyes wide, her cigarette trembling. "Mind if I join you?" Nancy asked, her tone light but her gaze steady. The woman hesitated, then nodded, her voice low. "You're Nancy Drew, aren't you?" Nancy's smile didn't waver, but her mind raced. "You have me at a disadvantage. Who are you?" "The..." Woman's eyes darted to Marlowe and Miss Marple, then back to Nancy. "Call me Clara. I know about the key. And the package. Langston sent me." Marlowe's voice cut in, sharp and low. "Sent you to do what, Clara? Talk or set us up?" Clara flinched, her hand tightening on her purse. "He's scared. They're after him, AV, the others. The package. It's bigger than you think. It's not just money or power, it's truth." Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but piercing. "Truth, my dear, is a dangerous commodity. What does Mr. Langston know, and where is he now?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice held steady. "He's hiding, somewhere safe. He gave me this." She slid a folded paper from her purse, the symbol embossed on its edge. "It's a map to the truth. But they're watching, always watching." Nancy took the paper, her fingers careful, her eyes locked on Clara's. "Who's they, Clara? Give us a name." Clara shook her head, her voice breaking. "I can't. They'll kill me. Just find Langston. He'll tell you everything." Before Nancy could press further, Clara bolted, her coat flapping as she fled the diner. Marlowe started to follow, but Nancy's hand on his arm stopped him. "Let her go," she said, her voice firm. "She's terrified. We have the map." Marlowe's eyes darkened, but he nodded, settling back into the booth. Nancy unfolded the paper, revealing a hand-drawn sketch. A building, its layout detailed, with a room marked vault. A single word was scrawled beneath. Eclipse. Miss Marple's eyes lit up, her voice a murmur. Eclipse. A code. A place, or perhaps a time. This map is our next step, but it's also a lure. Nancy's resolve hardened, her mind turning over Clara's words. The package, the truth, AV's shadow. The diner's warmth felt fragile, the city's jaws closer than ever. Marlowe's cynicism was a shield, Miss Marple's wisdom a beacon, and Nancy's intuition a blade. The map was a promise, but promises in Los Angeles came with blood. As they left the diner, the ace of spades burned in Nancy's mind, AV's taunt a challenge they couldn't ignore. The eclipse was calling, and they were running out of time. The Los Angeles dawn was a bruise, its gray light bleeding over the city's sprawl, softening the edges of its grit but not its menace. Philip Marlowe's Ford rumbled through the emptying streets, the diners, neon fading in the rearview mirror, its warmth a memory swallowed by the cold. The map Clara had given them lay on the dashboard, its hand-drawn lines a riddle wrapped in a dare. The word eclipse, scrawled beneath the sketch of a building, pulsed in Nancy Drew's mind, a clue that felt like a key but opened no doors yet. The ace of spades, AV's taunt, was tucked in her purse beside the defaced photograph and the journal from the Sunset Tower vault. Each item a weight, a promise, a threat. Nancy sat in the passenger seat, her green eyes tracing the maps, details, a rectangular structure, a vault marked in red, corridors twisting like veins. The building wasn't named, but its layout suggested something industrial, hidden, a place where secrets could be buried. The journal's coded entries, partially deciphered by Miss Marple's keen mind, hinted at a package tied to power, truth, and blood. Clara's words, "It's not just money or power. It's truth," echoed, a warning that the package was more than a physical object. It was a revelation, one that had driven Langston to hide and AV to orchestrate this deadly game. "Miss Jane." Marple sat in the back, her clutch on her lap, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm that steadied the car's tense silence. The city's chaos was a world away from St. Mary Mead, but its human currents, fear, ambition, betrayal, were her domain. The symbol on the brass key, the circle bisected by a line, had stirred memories of a case involving a clandestine group, their treasures marked with such signs. Clara's purse, embossed with the same symbol, confirmed it. They were chasing something ancient, powerful, and coveted. Marlowe's cigarette glowed, its smoke curling upward as he navigated the city's veins. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning, for the man in the trench coat or any new shadow. The voice in the Sunset Tower basement, "You're chasing ghosts," lingered, a taunt that matched AV's ace of spades. "This Eclipse place," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "It's no diner. Industrial layout, hidden vault, sounds like a fortress or a tomb." Nancy's fingers tightened on the map, her mind racing. "It's not in the city center. The journal mentioned shipments, deliveries, warehouses maybe, the docks, or the outskirts. Somewhere AV could move something without eyes." Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but piercing. "And somewhere Mr. Langston could hide. The map is a lure, my dears, but it's also a confession. Clara was terrified, yet she risked meeting us. She knows more than she said." Marlowe snorted, flicking ash out the window. "Yeah, and she's running, like Langston, like everyone tied to this damn package. Question is, are we hunters or bait?" Nancy's lips curved, a spark of defiance in her gaze. "We're neither, Marlowe. We're the ones who break the game. We find the Eclipse, we find the package, we find Langston. And we end this." Miss Marple's smile was faint but approving. "Boldly said, Miss Drew. But we must be clever as well as brave. The symbol on the key on Clara's purse, it's no coincidence. It marks a brotherhood or a cabal. Their secrets are guarded by blood." The car slowed as they reached the docks, a sprawl of warehouses and cranes hunched against the Pacific's gray expanse. The air was sharp with salt and oil, the gulls' cries a jagged chorus. Marlowe parked behind a rusted shipping container, the Ford's engine ticking as it cooled. The map's layout matched a cluster of buildings ahead, their corrugated roofs glinting faintly, their windows dark as blind eyes. Nancy's pulse quickened, but her mind stayed cool. "That one," she said, pointing to a warehouse set apart. Its walls weathered but its doors reinforced, a modern lock glinting. "It fits the map." Marlowe's hand brushed his revolver, his eyes scanning the docks. "Quiet for a working port. Too quiet. Stay sharp." Miss Marple stepped from the car, her black dress blending with the dawn shadows, her clutch a quiet anchor. "Indeed, Mr. Marlowe. A place this still has secrets to keep." They moved toward the warehouse, their steps silent on the cracked asphalt. Nancy's flashlight stayed off, her eyes adjusting to the gray light as she scanned for movement. Marlowe's gun was a shadow in his hand while Miss Marple's gaze swept the ground, catching details, a cigarette butt fresh like the ones at Langston's office and mansion. The man in the trench coat was here, or had been. The warehouse door was steel, its lock a challenge, but Nancy and Marlowe worked together, their tools flashing in the dim light. The mechanism yielded, the door creaking open to reveal a cavernous interior, its air heavy with dust and metal. Crates loomed in stacks, their labels faded, while a faint hum, machinery or something else, vibrated through the floor. Nancy's flashlight flicked on, its beam low, sweeping the space. The map's corridors were here, twisting between crates, leading to a back wall where a steel panel stood, its surface unmarked save for a slot the size of the brass key. Her heart thudded, but her voice was steady. "The vault." Marlowe handed her the key, his eyes hard. "Your call, Drew. But if this blows up, we're all in the fire." Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her clutch, her voice calm but urgent. "Be mindful, Miss Drew. What lies within may change everything." Nancy slid the key into the slot, the mechanism clicking as she turned it. The panel slid open, revealing a small chamber, its walls bare, its floor holding a single object, a wooden box, its lid carved with the circle and line symbol. Nancy's breath caught, but she knelt, her gloved hands lifting the box. It was heavy, locked, but a faint rattle suggested papers, or something fragile. Marlowe's jaw tightened as he crouched beside her. "That's the package, or part of it. Open it, Drew." Nancy's tools flashed, the lock yielding to her skill. The lid creaked open, revealing a manuscript, its pages yellowed, its handwriting dense and urgent. A title was scrawled on the cover, The Eclipse Codex. Beneath it, a list of names, some familiar from the journal, others new, all marked with the symbol. A single note was pinned to the manuscript, its ink fresh. AV protects the truth. Deliver to Langston. Eclipse is the end. Nancy's mind raced. The words a jolt. The Eclipse Codex. This is what they're killing for. A document, a record, truth. Like Clara said. Miss Marple's eyes lit up, her voice soft but certain. A codex is a ledger of secrets, my dears. This one names names, exposes deeds. No wonder it's guarded by blood. Marlowe's gun was steady, his eyes scanning the chamber. Yeah, and it's a death sentence for whoever holds it. Langston's supposed to get this, but he's running. AV's playing both sides. A sound broke the silence, a metallic clang from the warehouse's main floor. Marlowe's gun snapped up, Nancy's flashlight flicked off, Miss Marple stepping into the shadows. They moved as one, back to the chamber's entrance, their breaths shallow, their senses straining. The clang came again, followed by footsteps, deliberate circling. Company, Marlowe muttered, his voice a blade. They knew we'd come. Nancy's heart pounded, but her mind was a steel trap. The manuscript's what they want, we can't let them take it. Miss Marple's hand rested on the box, her voice barely audible. Nor can we fight blindly. We must protect the codex, but we must also survive. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a voice, the same low, amused tone from the Sunset Tower. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Hand over the box and you walk away. Marlowe's grip tightened, his voice a growl. Show yourself or I start shooting holes in crates. A chuckle, then a shadow moved, tall and lean at the edge of the crates. The man in the trench coat stepped into the dim light, his face hard, his eyes gleaming. A gun glinted in his hand, its barrel steady. You're out of your depth, Marlowe. You too, Drew. And the old lady, sharp but slow. Give me the codex. Nancy's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. You're AV's dog, aren't you? Who's holding your leash? The man's smile was cold, his gun unwavering. AV's. A name, kid. The codex is power. Hand it over, or I paint this warehouse red. Miss Marple's voice cut through, calm but piercing. You're afraid, sir. Not of us, but of what the codex reveals. Who do you serve, or do you even know? The man's smile faltered, his gun twitching. Shut it, Grandma, last chance. Marlowe moved faster than thought, his gun barking as he dove behind a crate. The man fired back, the shots echoing, splintering wood. Nancy grabbed the box, pulling Miss Marple down, her flashlight a beacon as she scanned for an exit. The warehouse was a maze, but the map's corridors were burned in her mind. This way, she hissed, leading them toward a side door. Bullets whined, crates exploding as the man advanced, his footsteps relentless. Marlowe returned fire, his shots precise, buying them time. Nancy's heart thundered, but her hands were steady, the codex a weight against her chest. Miss Marple moved with surprising speed, her clutch clutched tightly, her eyes sharp despite the chaos. The side door was locked, but Nancy's tools flashed, the mechanism yielding under pressure. They burst into the dawn, the dock's gray light, a shock after the warehouse's dark. Marlowe followed, his gun still raised, his face a mask of fury. The man didn't pursue, his footsteps fading, but his voice carried, a final taunt. You can't hide the truth forever. They reached the car, Marlowe gunning the engine as they peeled away, the docks shrinking behind them. Nancy held the codex, its pages of fire in her hands, while Miss Marple's needles reappeared, clicking softly, a rhythm against the storm. Marlowe's eyes were hard, his voice grim. That bastard's not working alone, AV's got an army. Nancy's resolve hardened, her mind turning over the codex's title, the Eclipse Codex. It's a record of something big, corruption maybe, or worse. Langston's the key, but we need to crack this code. Miss Marple's eyes were bright, her voice steady. And we must protect it, my dears. The codex is a weapon, but weapons cut both ways. They drove to a safe house Marlowe knew, a run-down apartment in a forgotten corner of the city. The walls were peeling, the air stale, but it was off the grid. A place to breathe, to think. Nancy spread the codex on a table, its pages a map of secrets. Miss Marple's cipher work continued, her pencil scratching, while Marlowe stood guard, his gun a constant shadow. The codex named names, senators, moguls, criminals, all linked, by the symbol, all tied to an organization called the Order of the Eclipse. The package wasn't gold or gems, it was this manuscript, a ledger of their sins, their power, their betrayals. AV was its guardian, or its thief, and Langston was its keeper, or its victim. As dawn became day, Nancy's eyes burned, but her spirit was iron. Marlowe's cynicism was a shield, Miss Marple's wisdom a lantern. The codex was their prize, but it was also their curse, and the man in the trench coat was a hunter who wouldn't stop. The eclipse was near, and the truth was a blade, sharp enough to kill them all. The Los Angeles dusk was a thief, stealing the day's heat and leaving a chill that seeped into the bones. The safe house, a crumbling apartment in the city's forgotten fringes, was a fortress of shadows, its peeling, walls and sagging floors a stark contrast to the glittering menace of the gilded cage or the sleek menace of the Sunset Tower. Inside, Nancy Drew sat at a rickety table, the Eclipse Codex open before her, its yellowed pages a labyrinth of secrets, names, dates, and coded confessions that mapped the sins of the Order of the Eclipse. The brass key, its circle and line symbol now a brand of danger, lay beside it, a silent sentinel. The defaced photograph, the notebook, the map to the eclipse, and AV's taunting ace of spades were spread out, a constellation of clues that burned in her mind. Philip Marlowe stood by the window, his cigarette a faint glow, his revolver resting on the sill as he watched the street below. The city was a beast, its growl muted here but never silent, and the man in the trench coat, their hunter, was out there, his taunt from the warehouse, "You can't hide the truth forever," a splinter in Marlowe's thoughts. The codex was a bomb, its secrets explosive enough to topple empires, and AV was either its fuse or its detonator. Marlowe didn't trust fuses, and he trusted AV even less. Miss Jane Marple sat across from Nancy, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm that anchored the room's tension. Her pencil scratched at a notepad, decoding the codex's cipher with a precision that belied her serene exterior. The Order of the Eclipse, she'd deduced, was no mere criminal syndicate, but a cabal of power, its members woven into the city's elite, politicians, moguls, even lawmen. The codex named them, detailed their bribes, their extortions, their murders. Clara's words, its truth, were no exaggeration. This manuscript was a guillotine, and Langston was its keeper, or its prey. Nancy's green eyes flicked over, the codex, her mind racing. "The Order's reach is massive," she said, her voice steady but taut. "Senators, studio heads, a police chief. Langston's name is here, marked as custodian. He was supposed to protect this, but something went wrong." Marlowe exhaled smoke, his gaze never leaving the street. "Wrong's an understatement. Drew. That blood in the club, the scratched-out face in the photo, someone's cleaning house. Langston's either running from the Order or from AV." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes sharp as she tapped a decoded line. "Or both. This entry. AV demands delivery, Eclipse 12th. That was yesterday. The package, this codex, was meant to change hands, but it didn't. Langston failed, or refused." Nancy's fingers tightened on the codex, her mind turning over. Clara's map. The eclipse wasn't just a place. It was an event, a moment when the Order's secrets would be exposed, or buried. The map points to that warehouse, but the codex mentions a final exchange at a place called the Observatory. Griffith Park, maybe. It's isolated, perfect for a handover. Marlowe's jaw clenched, his cigarette flaring. Or an ambush. Griffith's a maze at night. Trails, cliffs, shadows. If AV's setting a trap, that's the place. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. And if Mr. Langston is there, he's desperate. A man with such secrets doesn't hide in the open unless he has no choice. Nancy nodded, her resolve iron. We go to the observatory. Tonight. The Codex is our leverage, but we need Langston to understand it. He's the key to AV, to the Order, to everything. Marlowe stubbed out his cigarette, his hand closing over his revolver. Gutsy, Drew, but risky. Our friend in the trench coat's still out there, and he's not alone. We walk into Griffith. We're walking into a shooting gallery. Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice calm but urgent. Then we must be prepared, Mr. Marlowe. The, Codex is a weapon, but it's also a target. We cannot let it fall into the wrong hands. The room fell silent, the weight of their decision settling like dust. Nancy packed the Codex into her purse, the key beside it, her flashlight and tools a familiar comfort. Marlowe checked his gun, its chambers full, while Miss Marple tucked her notepad into her clutch, her knitting a quiet promise of clarity. Dusk was fading, the city's lights waking, and the observatory was calling, a beacon of truth or a grave. They left the safe house, the Ford's engine a low growl as they drove toward Griffith Park. The city's sprawl gave way to hills, their slopes dark and tangled. The observatory's dome a pale crescent against the sky. Marlowe parked off a side trail, the car hidden by brush, his eyes scanning for movement. The air was cool, heavy with pine and earth, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Nancy led the way, her flashlight off, her steps sure on the uneven path. The map's layout was burned in her mind, the observatory's grounds a puzzle of trails and clearings. Marlowe's gun was a shadow in his hand, his senses tuned to every snap of a twig. Miss Marple followed, her small frame steady, her eyes catching details. A footprint, fresh in the dirt, a cigarette butt, identical to the others. Someone's been here, Nancy whispered, her voice low. Recently? Marlowe's eyes narrowed, his gun steady. Yeah, and they're not sightseeing. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her clutch, her voice soft but piercing. We're close, my dears. The observatory is no mere landmark. It's a stage, and we're not the only players. The trail opened to a clearing, the observatory's white walls glowing faintly, its dome a silent witness. A single light burned. In a side building, its flicker erratic, like the candle in Langston's mansion. Nancy's pulse quickened, but her mind stayed cool. That's our target, she said, nodding toward the light. Marlowe's jaw tightened, his gun raised. Slow and steady, Drew. If Langston's in there, he's not alone. They approached, their steps silent on the grass, the observatory's bulk a shield and a threat. The side building was an annex, its door ajar, the light spilling into the, dusk. Nancy's hand brushed her flashlight, but she kept it off, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. Marlowe took point, his gun a steady extension of his will, while Miss Marple's gaze swept the clearing, catching a glint, metal, in the trees. Ambush, she whispered, her voice urgent. To the left. Marlowe spun, his gun barking as a figure lunged from the shadows, a blade flashing. The shot missed, the figure dodging, but the noise shattered the silence, waking the night. Nancy grabbed Miss Marple, pulling her behind a pillar, her flashlight snapping on to blind their attacker. The man in the trench coat emerged, his gun raised, his face a mask of cold fury. You're stubborn, he snarled, his voice the same from the warehouse. But you're done. Marlowe fired again, the shot grazing the man's shoulder, but he didn't flinch, his gun steady. Nancy's mind raced, her hand slipping into her purse for the Codex. You want this? She called, holding it up, her voice defiant. Come and get it. The man's eyes gleamed, but before he could move, another figure burst from the annex. Victor Langston, his silver hair wild, his tuxedo torn. No, he shouted, his voice raw. It's mine. The distraction was enough. Marlowe tackled the man in the trench coat, their guns clattering as they grappled. Nancy shoved the Codex into Miss Marple's hands, her flashlight a weapon, as she swung it at a second attacker emerging from the trees. Miss Marple clutched the Codex, her knitting needles flashing. A surprising defense as she jabbed at a third figure. Langston stumbled toward Nancy, his eyes wide with terror. "They'll kill me," he gasped. "The Codex. It's everything. AV, they're not what you think." Nancy grabbed his arm, pulling him behind the pillar. "Who's AV?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "What's the order?" Langston's breath was ragged, his words tumbling. "The order, they own the city. The Codex exposes them, bribes, murders, everything. AV's trying to stop them, but they're betrayed. The woman, Elise, she knew too much." Nancy's heart thudded, the defaced photograph flashing in her mind. Elise, the woman in the photo. Where is she? Langston's eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking. "Dead. They killed her. At the club. I was supposed to protect her, but I failed." A shot rang out and Langston flinched, blood blooming on his shoulder. Nancy pulled him down, her flashlight sweeping for the shooter. Marlowe was still grappling, his fists a blur, while Miss Marple held the Codex, her needles a shield. The Sower clearing was a battlefield, shadows moving, guns flashing. Nancy's mind was a steel trap, her voice steady. "We need to move now. The annex, there's cover." She dragged Langston, his weight heavy, his blood warm on her hands. Miss Marple followed, the Codex clutched tightly, her steps sure despite the chaos. Marlowe broke free, his gun recovered, his shots driving their attackers back. They reached the annex, its door slamming shut behind them, the light inside a harsh glare. The room was a storage space filled with crates and files, a single desk holding a typewriter and a stack of papers. Langston collapsed, his breath shallow, his eyes darting. "The Codex," he gasped. "It's the truth. The order. They'll burn the city to keep it hidden." Nancy knelt beside him, her hands pressing his wound, her voice urgent. "Where's AV? Who betrayed them?" Langston's eyes flickered, his voice a whisper. "AV's. Not one person. It's a code, a resistance. Elise was part of it. I was supposed to deliver the Codex to them, but the Order found out. They're everywhere." Marlowe's gun was raised, his eyes on the door. "Great. A secret war, and we're in the middle. How many are out there?" Langston coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Too many. The man in the trench coat, he's their enforcer. Calls himself Shade. He won't stop." Miss Marple's voice cut through, calm but piercing. "Then we must be smarter, Mr. Langston. The Codex names the Order's leaders. If we expose them, their power crumbles." Nancy's mind raced, Langston's words a key turning in a lock. AV as a resistance, Elise's death, the Order's reach. It was a machine, and the Codex was its heart. "We need to get Langston out," she said, her tone resolute. "And the Codex, we can't lose either." A crash shook the door, Shade's voice snarling through the wood. "You're trapped, Marlowe. Hand it over or I burn this place down." Marlowe's grin was feral, his gun steady. "Try it, Shade. I've got plenty of bullets." Nancy's eyes swept the room, landing on a vent in the wall, its grate loose. "There," she said, her voice low. "We can crawl through. It'll lead outside." Miss Marple nodded, her clutch a quiet anchor. "Quickly, my dears. Time is our enemy." Nancy pried the grate free, her tools flashing, while Marlowe dragged crates to barricade the door. Langston was fading, his breath shallow, but Nancy pulled him toward the vent, her strength fueled by adrenaline. Miss Marple crawled through first, the Codex safe, her small frame navigating the tight space. Nancy followed, Langston's weight, a struggle while Marlowe brought up the rear, his gun a final defiance. The vent led to a hillside, the observatory's lights distant, the city a glittering threat below. They emerged, Langston gasping, the Codex intact. Marlowe's car was a risk, but it was their only chance. They stumbled down the trail, Shade's shouts fading, but his threat a shadow that clung. The Ford roared to life, Marlowe driving like a man possessed, the city streets a blur. Nancy held Langston, his blood soaking her dress, her mind a storm of questions. Miss Marple clutched the Codex, her needles silent, her eyes bright with purpose. The observatory was behind them, but the danger was everywhere and dusk had become night, a cloak for hunters. The safe house was compromised, but Marlowe knew another. A motel on the city's edge, its neon sign flickering. They carried Langston. Inside, his pulse weak, his secrets heavier than his wounds. The codex was their prize, but it was also their chain. And Shade was a blade, cutting closer with every hour. As they bandaged Langston, Nancy's resolve was iron, Marlowe's cynicism a shield, Miss Marple's wisdom a lantern. The eclipse was no longer a place. It was a reckoning, and the truth was a fire that would burn them all. The motel's neon sign buzzed like a trapped insect, its red glow flickering over the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Tucked on the edge of Los Angeles, where the city's glitz gave way to dust and despair, the place was a last refuge, a nowhere spot where questions were currency and answers were rare. Inside room 12, the air was thick with antiseptic and tension, the faint hum of a radiator battling the night's chill. Victor Langston lay on a sagging bed, his silver hair matted with sweat, his shoulder bandaged but still seeping blood. His breath was shallow, his eyes darting like a man who saw ghosts in every shadow. Nancy Drew knelt beside him, her hands steady as she checked his pulse, her green eyes sharp despite the exhaustion tugging at her. The Eclipse Codex rested on a chipped table, its pages open, its secrets a weight that pressed on her chest. The brass key, the defaced photograph, the notebook, the map to the eclipse, and AV's ace of spades were arrayed beside it, a puzzle with too many edges. Langston's words at the observatory, AV's a code, a resistance. Elise was part of it, had shifted the ground beneath her, but the truth was still a shadow, slippery and sharp. Philip Marlowe leaned against the door, his revolver in hand, his cigarette a faint ember in the dim light. The city's pulse was a distant growl, but Shade's threat, "I burn this place down," echoed in his mind, a promise of fire that matched the ace of spades taunt. The man in the trench coat, now named Shade, was the order of the Eclipse's blade, and Marlowe knew blades didn't stop until they cut. The codex was their prize, but it was also their noose, and every hour tightened the knot. Miss Jane Marple sat at the table, her knitting needles silent for once, her notepad filled with decoded fragments of the codex's cipher. Her small frame was a quiet anchor, her eyes bright with the clarity of a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. The Order of the Eclipse was a hydra, its heads buried in the city's elite, its venom in the codex's pages, names, crimes, betrayals. AV, Langston had claimed, was a resistance, a shadow fighting shadows. But Miss Marple's instincts whispered of deeper layers, of truths hidden even from the truth-seekers. Nancy's voice broke the silence, her tone steady but urgent. "Langston, you need to talk. Who's AV? What did Elise know that got her killed?" Langston's eyes flickered, his voice a rasp. Elise. She was the Codex's scribe. She found the Order's secrets, wrote them down. AV. They're not one person. It's a group fighting the Order. I was their courier, meant to deliver the Codex to a contact, but the Order knew. They always know. Marlowe's jaw tightened, his cigarette flaring. Knew how, Langston? You slip or you sell out. Langston flinched, his bandaged shoulder twitching. I didn't betray them. Elise. She trusted someone she shouldn't. The Order has eyes everywhere. Cops, judges, my own studio. They killed her at the gilded cage, left her blood to warn me. Nancy's mind raced, the defaced photograph flashing in her thoughts. Elise smiling, her companion's face scratched out. The man in the photo, she said, her voice sharp. Who was he? The one Elise trusted? Langston's eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking. Her brother Adrian. He was AV's leader, or close to it. He vanished after she died. The Order got him, or he's hiding. I don't know. Miss Marple's pencil paused, her eyes narrowing. Adrian, she murmured, her voice soft but piercing. AV. Adrian Voss, perhaps? The initials fit, and a brother's betrayal would cut deeply. Nancy's pulse quickened, the pieces shifting. If Adrian's AV or part of it, he's the one who summoned us. The telegrams, the letter, they were his call for help. Marlowe snorted, his gun a steady shadow. Help or a setup? If this Adrian's alive, he's playing a dangerous game, dragging us into his war. And Shade's still out there, hunting. Langston coughed, blood flecking his lips. Shade. He's the Order's dog. No name, no past, just death. He wants the Codex to bury it, to protect the Order's secrets. Nancy's resolve hardened, her hand brushing the Codex. Then we expose them. The Codex names their leaders, Senator Hargrove, Chief Delaney, half a dozen moguls. If we get it to the right people, the Order crumbles. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. The right people, my dear, are hard to find in a city like this. The Codex is a flame, and flames attract moths and predators. Marlowe's eyes flicked to the window, catching a shadow's flicker across the parking lot. Speaking of predators, he muttered, his gun raised. We've got company. Nancy's senses sharpened, her flashlight in hand, her body tensing. Langston's breath hitched, his eyes wide with fear. Miss Marple's needles appeared, clicking softly, a rhythm against the storm. The shadow moved again, deliberate, circling the motel. Marlowe's voice was a low growl. Stay low. Drew, get Langston to the bathroom. Barricade it. Miss Marple, with me. Nancy nodded, her movement swift as she pulled Langston from the bed, his weight heavy but her strength unyielding. The bathroom was small, its door flimsy, but she wedged a chair under the knob, her eyes scanning for weapons, a pipe, a shard of glass, anything. Langston slumped against the wall, his voice a whisper. They'll kill you all. The Codex. It's cursed. Nancy's jaw clenched, her voice firm. Curses don't scare me, Langston. Stay quiet and stay alive. Outside, Marlowe crouched by the window, his gun steady, Miss Marple beside him, her clutch a quiet shield. The shadow resolved into two figures, then three, their movements coordinated, their silhouettes armed. Shade's voice cut through the night, cold and amused. You're cornered, Marlowe. Give me the Codex and I let the old lady walk. Marlowe's grin was feral, his gun unwavering. You're a lousy liar, Shade. Come closer and I'll carve you a new smile. Miss Marple's voice was calm, almost serene. He's stalling, Mr. Marlowe. They want the Codex, but they fear it. We have the advantage if we use it. Marlowe's brow arched, a spark of respect in his gaze. Advantage, huh? All right, lady, what's the play? Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the Codex, then to the door. A diversion. They expect us to fight or flee. We do neither. We negotiate, but on our terms. Nancy emerged from the bathroom, catching the tail of Miss Marple's words. Negotiate? She asked, her voice low. With Shade? He's a killer. Miss Marple's smile was sharp, her needles clicking. Even killers have masters, Miss Drew. Shade serves the Order, and the Order wants the Codex intact. We offer a trade, false, of course, to draw them out. Nancy's mind raced, the plan clicking into place. We use the notebook, not the Codex. It's close enough to fool them in the dark. Buy time to get Langston out. Marlowe's eyes darkened, but he nodded. Risky, but I'm game. Drew, you're the bait, I'll cover you. Miss Marple, keep that Codex safe. Nancy grabbed the notebook, its pages a decoy, her flashlight a beacon as she stepped to the door. Her heart thudded, but her voice was steady, cutting through the night. Shade, you want the Codex? Let's talk. A chuckle, then footsteps, Shade's silhouette looming in the neon glow. Brave kid, he said, his gun glinting. Show me the book. Nancy held up the notebook, its cover catching the light, her eyes locked on his. Here it is. Let Langston go and it's yours. Shade's smile was cold, his gun steady. Toss it over and maybe I don't shoot you. Marlowe's gun barked from the window, the shot grazing Shade's arm, forcing him to duck. Nancy threw the notebook, its pages fluttering as it landed in the dirt. Shade lunged for it, his men closing in, but Marlowe's shots kept them pinned, his aim precise. Nancy darted back, pulling Langston from the bathroom, Miss Marple following, the Codex clutched tightly. They slipped through a back window, the motel's alley a maze of shadows. Marlowe joined them, his gun still raised, his breath ragged. The notebook had bought seconds, not minutes, and Shade's shout, "It's a fake," echoed a promise of pursuit. The Ford was a block away, hidden in a lot, but the alley was a gauntlet, Shade's men circling. Nancy led, Langston's wait, a struggle, her flashlight off, her senses sharp. Miss Marple's steps were sure, her clutch a quiet anchor, while Marlowe's gun was a shield, his eyes scanning for movement. A shot whined, splintering brick, and Nancy ducked, pulling Langston down. Marlowe returned fire, his shots a warning. But the alley was narrowing, the car too far. Miss Marple's voice cut through, calm but urgent. "The dumpster there. Cover." They scrambled behind it, the metal cold, the stench overwhelming. Shade's men advanced, their footsteps deliberate, their guns flashing. Nancy's mind was a steel trap, her eyes catching a fire escape above. "Up," she whispered, pointing. "It'll lead to the roof." Marlowe's grin was grim, his gun steady. "Gutsy, Drew, go, I'll hold them." Nancy climbed, Langston's weight a burden she refused to drop, her muscles burning. Miss Marple followed, her small frame navigating the rungs with surprising agility, the codex safe. Marlowe fired, his shots a drumbeat, buying them time. The roof was flat, its gravel crunching, the city's lights a glittering threat below. "Shades, eh?" Voice rose, a snarl of fury. "You can't run forever, Marlowe." Marlowe reached the roof, his gun empty, his fists ready. "Watch me," he muttered, joining them as they crossed to another building, its fire escape leading to the lot. The Ford was there, untouched, a miracle in a night of knives. They piled, in Langston gasping, the codex intact. Marlowe gunned the engine, the city's streets a blur, Shade's shouts fading, but his threat a shadow that clung. Nancy held Langston, his blood warm, her mind a storm of revelations. Miss Marple clutched the codex, her needles silent, her eyes bright with purpose. They drove to a new safe house, a church basement Marlowe knew, its pews dusty, but its walls thick. Langston was fading, his secrets heavier than his wounds. But the codex was alive, its pages a map to the Order's heart. Nancy spread it open, Miss Marple's decoded notes beside it, the names a roll call of power. Hargrove, Delaney, a dozen others, their crimes laid bare. "Adrian Voss," Nancy said, her voice steady. "If he's AV, he's our next move. The codex mentions a safe house, a place called the Haven. It's in the hills, hidden." Marlowe lit a cigarette, his eyes hard. "If Voss is alive, he's a ghost. And ghosts don't play nice. Shade's still out there, and he's not stopping." Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice calm but piercing. "Nor are we, Mr. Marlowe. The codex is our sword, but it's also our shield. We must find Mr. Voss and we must protect Mr. Langston. The Order's time is running out." Nancy's resolve was iron, her mind turning over the Haven's location. The church's silence was a fragile peace, the city's jaws closer than ever. Marlowe's cynicism was a shield, Miss Marple's wisdom a lantern, and Nancy's intuition a blade. The Haven was a promise, but promises in Los Angeles came with blood, and the secrets they'd unraveled were only the beginning. As Langston's breath steadied, the codex's pages turned, and the night deepened. The eclipse was no longer a moment, it was a war, and they were its soldiers, armed with truth and hunted by shadows. The church basement smelled of dust and old hymnals, its stone walls a cold embrace that muffled the Los Angeles night. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting jagged shadows over the pews where Nancy Drew, Philip, Marlowe, and Miss Jane Marple had taken refuge. Victor Langston lay on a makeshift cot, his breath shallow but steady, his bandaged shoulder a stark reminder of the observatory's bloodshed. The Eclipse Codex lay open on a wooden table, its pages a litany of the Order of the Eclipse's sins. Bribes, murders, betrayals, each name a thread in a web that spanned the city's elite. The brass key, the defaced photograph, the notebook, the map to the eclipse, and AV's ace of spades were arrayed beside it, a constellation of danger that burned in Nancy's mind. Nancy stood over the codex, her green eyes tracing the decoded names: Senator Hargrove, Chief Delaney, studio moguls and others, all marked by the circle and line symbol. Adrian Voss, Elisa's brother and likely AV, was the Resistance's heart, his summons bringing them to this moment. The Haven, a safe house in the hills mentioned in the Codex, was their next move, but Shade's pursuit, the Order's enforcer, relentless and cold, loomed like a storm. The Ace of Spades, AV's taunt, was a challenge. AV sees all. Nancy's resolve was iron, but her instinct screamed of a trap, one they'd have to turn against their hunters. Philip Marlowe paced by the basement's narrow window, his cigarette a faint ember, his revolver a constant shadow in his hand. The city's pulse was a distant growl, but Shade's voice, "You can't run forever, Marlowe," echoed from the motel, a promise of violence that matched the blood in the gilded cage. The Codex was a weapon, its secrets enough to topple the Order. But Marlowe knew weapons drew fire, and they were running out of cover. Miss Jane Marple sat at the table, her knitting needles clicking softly, her notepad filled with the Codex's final decoded fragments. The Order of the Eclipse was a machine, its gears oiled with power and fear. But AV's resistance was a wrench, and the Codex was its blade. Adrian Voss, if alive, was their ally, or their puppet master. Miss Marple's eyes were bright, her mind a labyrinth of connections, her calm a beacon in the storm. Nancy's voice cut through the silence, her tone steady but urgent. The Haven's our next step. The Codex says it's a safe house, a place where AV, Adrian Voss, planned to regroup. If he's there, he can explain the Codex, the Order, everything. Marlowe snorted, exhaling smoke. If he's there, he's a ghost. And ghosts don't like company. Shade's still hunting, and the Order's got eyes everywhere. We walk into the Haven. We're walking into a fight. Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but piercing. Then we must choose the battlefield, Mr. Marlowe. The Codex is our leverage, but it's also our bait. We can draw the Order out, expose them, but only if we're clever. Nancy's mind raced, the pieces shifting. The Haven was a lead, but Langston's words, "The Order has eyes everywhere," were a warning. Shade wasn't alone. The Order's reach was vast, its members hidden in plain sight. "We can't just run to the Haven," she said, her eyes narrowing. "We need to control the game, set a trap, use the Codex to lure the Order's leaders, Hargrove, Delaney, the rest." Marlowe's brow arched, a spark of respect in his gaze. "Gutsy, Drew. You're talking about poking a hornet's nest with a stick. How do you plan to pull it off without getting stung?" Nancy's lips curved, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "We leak a story, say the Codex is being handed over at a public place, somewhere we can control. The Order will send their heavy hitters, maybe even Shade. We watch, we listen, we catch them in the act." Miss Marple's smile was faint but approving. "A bold plan, Miss Drew, but delicate. The Order is cautious, their leaders insulated. We must make the bait irresistible, and we must protect Mr. Langston. He's our witness, and witnesses are fragile." Langston stirred, his voice a rasp. "You're mad, all of you. The Order, they'll kill you. Hargrove, Delaney, they don't negotiate. The Codex is their death sentence, and they know it." Nancy knelt beside him, her hand steady on his arm. "Then help us, Langston. Tell us about the Haven. Where is it? Is Voss there?" Langston's eyes flickered, his breath hitching. "The Haven, it's an old estate, in the hills above Malibu. Voss used it to hide, to plan. I don't know if he's there now. After Elise died, he went dark, but the Order's watching it, they always are." Marlowe's jaw tightened, his cigarette flaring. "Great. Another trap. We're running out of lives, Drew." Nancy's resolve hardened, her mind turning over the plan. "Then we make this count. We leak the handover at a place we can control, Pershing Square downtown. It's public, busy, but we can scout it, set up cover. We use the Codex as bait, but we keep the real one safe. Langston stays here, under guard." Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice calm but urgent. "And we must anticipate Shade. He's no mere thug. He's a strategist. If he suspects, A ruse, he'll strike where we're weakest. Marlowe nodded, his gun a steady shadow. Then we hit hard and fast. I know a guy, a reporter, Eddie Crane. Owes me a favor. He can plant the story, make it loud. Codex handover, Pershing, square midnight. The order'll bite. Nancy's eyes lit up, the plan solidifying. We need a decoy codex, something close enough to fool them in the dark. I can rig the notebook, make it look right. Miss Marple, can you finish decoding the real codex? We need every name, every crime. Miss Marple's smile was sharp, her pencil scratching. I'm nearly there, my dear. The codex is a tapestry, and I'm pulling the final threads. By tonight, we'll have the order's heart laid bare. Langston's voice was a whisper, his eyes haunted. You don't know what you're up against. The order, they're not just men, they're a machine, and machines don't stop. Nancy's jaw clenched, her voice firm. Neither do we, Langston. Rest. We'll handle this. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Marlowe slipped out to meet Eddie Crane, the reporter, his cynicism a shield as he fed him the story. A mysterious codex, a handover at Pershing Square, a scandal that could shake the city. Crane's eyes gleamed, his typewriter already clacking. The story set to hit the evening edition. Nancy worked on the decoy, binding the notebook's pages to mimic the codex, its cover embossed with a crude copy of the circle and line symbol. Miss Marple's pencil flew, the codex's final codes yielding to her skill, revealing a network of corruption that reached beyond Los Angeles, Washington, New York, even overseas. By dusk, the church basement was a war room, the plan a blade sharpened to a lethal edge. Nancy's flashlight and tools were ready, her dress swapped for slacks and a dark jacket, her auburn hair tucked beneath a cap. Marlowe's revolver was loaded, his fedora tilted, his eyes hard with purpose. Miss Marple's knitting was packed, her clutch holding the real codex, her calm a lantern in the gathering storm. Pershing Square was a mile away, its fountains and palm trees a deceptive oasis in the city's heart. They arrived early, the square alive with evening crowds, workers heading home, couples strolling, vendors hawking papers. Nancy scouted the terrain, her eyes mapping sight lines, cover points, exits. Marlowe took a position by a fountain, his gun hidden beneath his coat, his eyes scanning for shade or the order's men. Miss Marple blended with the crowd, her small frame unassuming, her clutch a shield for the codex. Nancy moved to the square's center, the decoy codex in a satchel, her flashlight a signal for Marlowe. The crowd thickened, the air heavy with anticipation. Nancy's pulse quickened, but her mind was a steel trap, her senses tuned to every face, every movement. Marlowe's eyes caught a glint, metal in a man's hand, near the trees. Shade, or one of his men. Miss Marple's gaze flicked to a car idling across the street, its driver too still, too watchful. Nancy raised her flashlight, its beam flashing twice, the signal for the trap. Marlowe moved, his gun ready, his steps silent. Miss Marple slipped behind a bench, her eyes sharp, the codex safe. The crowd parted, unaware of the storm brewing as figures emerged, men in suits, their faces hard, their hands near their coats. The order's leaders or their proxies drawn by the bait. Shade stepped into the light, his trench coat a shadow, his gun glinting. You're predictable, Drew, he called, his voice cold. Hand it over or this square becomes a graveyard. Nancy's voice was steady, her eyes locked on his. You want the codex? Name your masters. Hargrove? Delaney? Or are you just a dog on a leash? Shade's smile was a blade, his gun unwavering. You're out of time, kid. Drop the bag. Marlowe's gun barked, the shot scattering the crowd, screams erupting. Shade dove, his men firing, bullets chewing pavement. Nancy dropped the satchel, the decoy codex spilling, its pages fluttering. Miss Marple's needles flashed, a distraction as she jabbed a man's hand, his gun clattering. Marlowe's shots were precise, pinning Shade's men, but the car across the street roared, its headlights blinding. Nancy dove behind a fountain, her flashlight a weapon as she swung it, cracking a man's skull. Marlowe grappled with another, his fists a blur while Miss Marple slipped through the chaos, the real codex safe, her small frame a ghost. Shade lunged for the decoy, his hands tearing at the pages, his curse a snarl as he realized the ruse. "It's a fake!" he roared, his gun swinging toward Nancy. Marlowe tackled him, their bodies crashing, guns skittering. Nancy scrambled, her tools flashing as she tripped another man, his gun firing wild. The car screeched closer, its driver leaning out, a submachine gun glinting. Miss Marple's voice cut through, calm but urgent. "The trees, Miss Drew, cover!" They dove into the foliage, bullets shredding leaves, the crowd a panicked tide. Marlowe dragged Shade, his wrists bound with Nancy's scarf, his face bloodied, but defiant. Miss Marple led, her steps sure, the codex a weight she carried lightly. The car pursued, its tires screaming, but the square's chaos was their shield, the crowd a wall. They reached an alley, Marlowe's car hidden, its engine roaring as they piled in, Nancy driving, Marlowe guarding Shade, Miss Marple clutching, the codex. The car's headlights cut the night, the city's streets a maze. The order's car fading but not gone. Shade's eyes gleamed, his voice a hiss. "You've won nothing, Marlowe. The order's bigger than you know." Nancy's jaw clenched, her hands steady on the wheel. "We've got you, Shade, and the codex. Your masters are finished." Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice soft but piercing. "Not yet, my dear. The haven awaits and Mr. Voss. The trap is set, but the war is not won." Marlowe's gun pressed Shade's ribs, his grin feral. "Talk, Shade. Names, places, or I carve you up." Shade's smile was cold, his silence a wall. The car sped. Toward the hills, the haven a beacon in the dark, the codex a fire in their hands. Nancy's resolve was iron, Marlowe's cynicism a shield, Miss Marple's wisdom a lantern. The trap had sprung, but the order was a hydra, its head still sharp, and the eclipse was a reckoning they couldn't escape. As the city's lights blurred, Shade's silence burned, and the haven loomed. The secrets they'd unraveled were a blade, cutting closer to the heart of the truth, and their own. The Malibu hills were a labyrinth of shadows, their winding roads cloaked in mist as the Los Angeles night deepened. The haven, an old estate perched above the Pacific, was a ghost in the dark, its stone walls weathered, its windows black as blind eyes. Philip Marlowe's Ford growled up the final incline, its headlights cutting through the fog, the engines rumble a defiance against the silence. In the back, Shade sat bound, his wrists tied with Nancy's scarf, his cold smile a challenge despite the blood on his face. The Eclipse Codex rested in Miss Marple's lap, its pages a weapon that had drawn blood and promised more. Nancy Drew gripped the wheel, her green eyes fixed on the road, her mind a steel trap weaving together the case's threads. The brass, key symbol, the defaced photograph of Elise, the ledger and notebook secrets, AV's taunting ace of spades, the map to the eclipse, and the Codex's damning truths. Victor Langston, stabilized but weak, was hidden in the church basement under the watch of Marlowe's trusted contact, his testimony a key to the order of the eclipse's downfall. Adrian Voss, Elise's brother and likely AV, was their final target, the haven his sanctuary, or his trap. Shade's silence burned, but Nancy's resolve was iron, forged by the blood and shadows they'd faced. Marlowe sat beside her, his revolver a steady shadow, his cigarette long gone, his eyes scanning the hills for movement. The Pershing Square. Trap had netted Shade, but the order's leaders, Senator Hargrove, Chief Delaney, and their ilk, were still out there, their machine humming despite the Codex's threat. Shade's taunt, "The order's bigger than you know," was a splinter in Marlowe's mind, a warning that the haven held answers or annihilation. Miss Jane Marple sat in the back, her knitting needles silent, her clutch a quiet anchor for the Codex. The Order of the Eclipse was a hydra, its heads named in the Codex's pages, its venom in the city's veins. Adrian Voss, if alive, was AV's heart, his resistance a flicker against the Order's dark. Miss Marple's eyes were bright, her mind a labyrinth of connections, her calm a lantern in the storm. The haven was the endgame, and she sensed its truths would cut deeper than any blade. Nancy's voice broke the silence, her tone steady but taut. The haven's close. If Voss is there, he's expecting us, or the order. We need to be ready, for both. Marlowe's jaw tightened, his gun a cold comfort. Voss is a ghost, Drew. If he's AV, he's been playing us from the start. And Shade here, he jabbed the revolver into Shade's ribs, knows more than he's saying. Shade's smile was a blade, his voice low. You're walking into a slaughter, Marlowe. The haven's a grave and Voss is its keeper. Miss Marple's voice was soft but piercing. You speak with certainty, sir, but fear lies beneath. The Codex threatens your masters and you cannot silence it. Who is Adrian Voss to you? Shade's eyes flickered, his silence a wall, but his jaw twitched, a crack in his armor. Nancy's pulse quickened, her mind turning over his words. He's scared, she said, her voice low. Not of us, but of Voss. The haven's not just a safe house, it's the Order's end. The estate loomed ahead, its iron gates rusted but intact, its driveway a tunnel of overgrown oaks. Nancy parked 100 yards out, the car hidden by brush, her flashlight off, her senses sharp. Marlowe dragged Shade from the back, his gun pressed to the enforcer's spine, while Miss Marple stepped out, her small frame steady, the Codex clutched tightly. The mist was thick, the air heavy with salt and secrets, the haven a fortress of silence. Nancy led, her steps silent on the gravel, her eyes scanning for traps, cameras, wires, shadows. Marlowe followed, Shade's bound hands a leash, his gun a warning. Miss Marple's gaze swept the ground, catching a glint, a cigarette butt fresh like the ones at Langston's office, the mansion, the docks. Our watcher has been here, she whispered, her voice urgent. We are not alone. Marlowe's eyes narrowed, his gun steady. Yeah, and they're not rolling out the welcome mat. The gate was unlocked, a deliberate invitation, its hinges creaking as they slipped through. The estate's grounds were a jungle of neglected gardens, statues crumbling, their stone faces watching. The main house was a sprawl of Gothic arches, its doors heavy oak, a single light flickering in a second-floor window. Nancy's heart thudded, but her mind was cool, the map's layout a ghost in her thoughts. The light, she said, her voice low. That's where we start. Marlowe nodded, his gun pressing Shade's back. Move, pal. You're our ticket in. Shade's smile was cold, his steps deliberate. You'll regret this, Marlowe. Voss doesn't forgive. Miss Marple's needles appeared, clicking softly, a rhythm against the tension. Nor do we, sir. But truth has a way of cutting through fear. The front door was ajar, its lock broken, the air inside stale with dust and time. The foyer was grand, its marble floor cracked, chandeliers draped in cobwebs. Nancy's flashlight swept the space, catching footprints, fresh, multiple, leading to a staircase. Marlowe's gun was a steady shadow, Shade's silence a weight. Miss Marple's eyes bright with purpose. The staircase creaked, its banister splintered, the light above growing brighter. The second floor was a maze of corridors, portraits lining the walls, their eyes accusing. The light came from a study. Its door open, a figure standing by a desk, a man tall, gaunt, his hair dark, his eyes haunted. Adrian Voss. Nancy's breath caught, but her voice was steady. Adrian Voss? The man turned, his face pale, his hands trembling but empty. You're here, he said, his voice raw. AV's call. You answered. Marlowe shoved Shade forward, his gun unwavering. Talk, Voss, you're AV, aren't you? What's the Codex? Why drag us into your war? Voss's eyes flicked to Shade, then to the Codex in Miss Marple's hands, his expression a mix of relief and dread. I'm AV, or part of it. The Resistance. Elise, my sister, started it. The Codex is her work, a record of the Order's crimes. I sent the telegrams, the letter. I needed you, your skills, your courage. Nancy's mind raced, the pieces locking. Elise was killed for it. Langston said you vanished. Why hide? Why not fight? Voss's laugh was bitter, his eyes wet. Fight? The Order's everywhere. Hargrove, Delaney, they own the city. Elise trusted the wrong person and they killed her. I hid to protect the Codex to finish her work. The Haven was our last stand. Shade's voice cut through a snarl. You're finished, Voss. The order's here. You can't stop them. Marlowe's gun pressed harder, his grin feral. Shut it, Shade. Voss, keep talking. Who betrayed? Elise? Voss's eyes darkened, his voice a whisper. Hargrove. He was her contact, her ally, or so she thought. He's the Order's head, the one who ordered her death. Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but piercing. And you, Mr. Voss, have been running ever since. But the Codex is complete, is it not? With it, we can expose the Order, end their reign. Voss nodded, his hands shaking. Yes, the Codex names them all, their crimes, their networks. But the Order's here. Hargrove, his men, they followed you or me. The Haven's compromised. A sound shattered the silence, a crash downstairs followed by footsteps, heavy, coordinated. Marlowe's gun snapped up, Shade's smile widening. Nancy's flashlight flicking off, Miss Marple stepping into the shadows. The study's door was a choke point, the staircase a gauntlet, the Haven a trap sprung. They're here, Nancy whispered, her voice steady. Hargrove's men? Maybe. Hargrove himself. Marlowe dragged Shade to a corner, his gun a warning. Stay put, pal, or you're the first to go. Voss's eyes were wide, his voice a hiss. There's a back stair to the basement. We can hide or fight. Miss Marple's voice was calm, her needles clicking. We fight, my dears, but on our terms. The Codex is our weapon and Mr. Voss is our voice. We must protect both. Nancy's mind was a steel trap, her plan forming. We split up. Marlowe, take Shade and Voss, get to the basement. Miss Marple with me. We'll draw them off, use the Codex as bait. We meet at the car in 10 minutes. Marlowe's brow arched, but he nodded, his gun steady. Gutsy, Drew. Don't get yourself killed. Nancy's lips curved, her flashlight a beacon. Not today, Marlowe. She grabbed the decoy Codex, the notebook from Pershing Square, its pages a lie that had fooled Shade once. Miss Marple followed, her small frame a ghost, the real Codex hidden in her clutch. Marlowe dragged Shade and Voss to the back stair, his gun a shield, his steps silent. Nancy and Miss Marple moved to the corridor, the footsteps below growing louder, voices sharp. Hargrove's nasal and commanding, barking orders. Nancy's flashlight flashed twice, a deliberate signal, drawing eyes. Shots rang out, splintering wood, and she dove, pulling Miss Marple behind a cabinet, her heart thundering but her mind cool. Hargrove! Nancy called, her voice defiant, the decoy Codex raised. You want this? Come and get it. Hargrove's laugh was cold, his silhouette looming at the staircase, his men fanning out. You're brave, Miss Drew, but foolish. Hand over the Codex and I'll let you live. Miss Marple's voice cut through, serene but sharp. You fear it, Senator. The Codex names you, your crimes. Your empire's crumbling. Hargrove's eyes gleamed, his gun glinting. An old woman and a girl? You're no match for the Order. Nancy, through the decoy, its pages scattering, drawing Hargrove's men forward. She and Miss Marple slipped to a side room, its windows a chance at escape. Bullets chewed plaster, but Nancy's tools flashed, the window's lock yielding. The night, air a shock. They climbed out, the mist a cloak, the car a beacon below. Marlowe reached the basement, Shade's silence a weight, Voss's fear a pulse. The space was a maze of crates, a hidden armory, guns, files, AV's arsenal. Voss grabbed a pistol, his hands shaking, his eyes hard. I'm done running, he said, his voice steady. Marlowe's grin was grim, his gun raised. Good. Stay behind me. Shade, one move, and you're done. The basement door crashed open, Hargrove's men descending, their guns flashing. Marlowe fired, his shots precise, Voss's pistol barking, Shade's eyes gleaming with defiance. The crates exploded, bullets whining, but Marlowe's aim was a blade, cutting through the dark. Nancy and Miss Marple reached the car, the Codex safe, their breaths ragged. The Haven's lights flickered, shots echoing, the mist a shroud. Nancy gunned the engine, the Ford roaring, her eyes scanning for Marlowe. Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice calm. "We must trust Mr. Marlowe, my dear. The codex is safe, and the truth will out." Marlowe burst from the basement, Voss behind him, Shade dragged, bloodied but alive. Hargrove's men pursued, their shots wild, the mist a shield. They piled into the car, Nancy peeling out, the haven shrinking, its secrets afire in their hands. Hargrove's voice roared, a final curse, but the mist swallowed him, his empire cracking. Nancy drove, the city's lights a blur, the codex a wait, Shade's silence a storm. Voss's eyes were wet, his voice a whisper. Elise, she'd be proud. Marlowe's gun pressed Shade's ribs, his voice grim. "You're talking now, pal. Names, places, everything." Shade's smile was gone, his voice low. "Hargrove's the head, but the order's global. The codex hurts them, but it won't kill them." Miss Marple's eyes were bright, her needles clicking. "Perhaps not, sir, but it will wound them. And wounds fester." They reached a new safe house, a warehouse Marlowe knew, its walls thick, its owner loyal. The codex was spread open, its secrets copied, sent to Eddie Crane, the reporter, whose story would break at dawn. The Eclipse Codex, corruption unveiled, Hargrove's name, Delaney's, the order's leaders, all exposed, their empire crumbling under the weight of truth. Shade was turned over to a cop Marlowe trusted, his silence broken by the codex's proof. Voss vanished, his mission complete. AV's resistance a shadow that would fight another day. Langston's testimony, safe with Crane, sealed the order's fate, its leaders arrested, their machine stalling. Nancy stood by the warehouse window, the city's dawn a bruise, her heart steady. Marlowe lit a cigarette, his cynicism softened, his respect for her clear. Miss Marple packed her knitting, her smile serene, her wisdom the thread that had bound them. "The eclipse is over," Nancy said, her voice soft but firm, "but the shadows remain." Marlowe exhaled smoke, his grin wry. "Always do, Drew. But we cut deep this time." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice a quiet promise. "And we will again, my dears. Truth is a lantern, and we are its keepers." They parted. Nancy to Bayport, Marlowe to his office, Miss Marple to St. Mary Mead. The codex's truth a fire that burned on. The order was wounded, AV a ghost, and the city a beast, but they'd faced its jaws and won. The final revelation was theirs, and the shadows for now were theirs to command.